thanks to all of you for coming. My name is Senator Gene Yaw. I happen to have the privilege of serving as the chairperson of the Center for Rural Pennsylvania. And for those of you who don't know, the Center for Rural Pennsylvania is a joint legislative agency. It's bipartisan, bicameral of the General Assembly. And our mission in life is to look into issues which somehow affect rural Pennsylvania. Today, we're going to look into the broadband issue. Hopefully, we're going to find out what it is, because many of us are pretty light on knowledge about broadband, why it's important, why we need it, and where we stand in rural Pennsylvania as to what's the status of broadband in rural Pennsylvania. I'd just like, by way of introduction, to tell you that introduce some of the other board members that are here. My vice chairman, Representative Everett from Lycoming County, Representative Kabulik is also a member of the Center for Rural Pennsylvania. We have Steve Brame and Darren Euchre and Dr. Stephen Getz. Those are the board members that are here today. We also have some special guest, and to my right is the President Pro Tem of the Senate. This happens to be his district, and we invited him, and I was glad that he could find time to be here for part of the hearing today. So with that, Senator Scarnati, do you have any comments?
Well, thank you, Senator Yaw. Something that I was talking about before coming into the room is about the battles that we face in Harrisburg. And I say this over and over so people that listen to me speak off the cuff know this mantra. But you know, the battles that we fight in Harrisburg aren't necessarily between Democrats and Republicans, aren't necessarily between liberals and conservatives. It's about rural areas getting their share of Pennsylvania. And just because we live in a rural area doesn't mean that we can have substandard roads, substandard schools, or in this case, substandard broadband. We just want something. And in those budget battles or in those policy battles, myself and members sitting up on this panel that are in the legislature know how we always go in and try and get a piece of that pie. It's difficult sometimes. It is really difficult. But we're committed to it, and this committee that has been set up is a great tool for us to come out, do hearings, bring back testimony, and certainly bring back real world reasons why we need to do things. So I want to thank Senator Yaw and the committee for coming here. Apologize for the weather. It's always like this when I'm traveling. And the only thing I want to say is, I was saying to Commissioner Coolidge a little earlier, you know, this is a little mixed emotion for me, because when I get on the road out through Cameron County and Potter County and Tioga County, I always use the excuse, well, I don't have any cell service, so I can't call you back. So I got to be careful now. I really do want to call people back, but it is kind of nice the phone doesn't ring when I'm out through this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Scarnati. We're also privileged to have Representative Causer with us today, and he chairs the House Ag Committee. Marty, do you have any comments?
Thank you, Chairman Yaw. It's great to be here with you and with all the committee members. I'm looking forward to the information that's going to be presented today. I have the privilege of representing Potter, Cameron, and McKean County, so I certainly know what Senator Scarnati is talking about with areas with the lack of cell signal, and certainly broadband access is critical for rural parts of the state. And as a legislator that represents some of the most rural counties in Pennsylvania, I think that this is an opportunity for us to work together to really help our rural areas. So again, I'm looking forward to the information presented, and thank all the board members and everyone who is here today.
Thank you. My Vice Chair, Representative Everett.
Yeah, I think that this is an issue that's probably the #1 issue that I hear consistently at the district office is folks complaining about their lack of high-speed internet or broadband, whichever term you want to use, out in rural areas. And it's interesting, Senator Yaw and I were just grabbing a little breakfast over at the lodge this morning, and at a table within earshot of us was some folks who work there and some local folks, and they were complaining about their lack of high-speed internet. And I said, how appropriate, and you hear it everywhere you go in rural Pennsylvania. You know, and a promise was made some 15 or so years ago that we were gonna, the companies were gonna build broadband out into rural areas, and technology's not only changed, but what was high-speed internet 15 years ago is not high-speed internet now, and I don't think those companies fulfilled their promise. So we're gonna delve into this issue here today from folks and start to see what we can do to build that out. The broadband and high-speed internet has become, you know, it used to be something nice to have. Today it's almost a necessity. Kids with school, people that run businesses, our state government and federal government, more and more you have to log on to renew your driver's license, to take a test, to do whatever, and that just doesn't work in rural areas right now, and we're going to see what we can do to fix that. And we'll leave it to that, and I think we're going to hear a lot of great information today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd also like at this point to extend a thanks to our caucus video services people. They're the ones who are responsible for setting up all the equipment here and all the microphones and all that, and they do a great job. And we've had a lot of hearings together, and they've always done a really super job for us. So and this is a way that hopefully we can use the electronics that are available to get this word out, and this hearing will be broadcast. I understand they're streaming it, I think, if they are. So if we have people out there that are watching it live. I'd also like to thank the county commissioners here. I know that there are several county commissioners that have taken the time to come here, because I think that the counties are a very, very important element of this whole thing with broadband. Now, with that, here's my goal for the morning. And I am noted for not doing this very well. My goal is at the last panel, I say good morning to them. And so you know what that means. So we will try to, and I am on schedule. I'm a little bit ahead. So the first...
That's okay.
Yeah, that is okay. So the first panelist is Joe Whitmer. He's counsel to Chairman Gladys Brown from the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. Mr. Whitmer.
Thank you, Chairman, and all the members of the Center for Rural Pennsylvania. Thank you for asking me to be here. I've worked with Barry and Jonathan and Mary for years exchanging information, so providing you with information today is what I'm going to do. I'm not here to offer any solutions, and my opinions are my own. They're not those of either the Chairman, Gladys Brown, or the Public Utility Commission, unless I indicate otherwise. I'm basically going to keep my comments to about 10 minutes, 25 years of experience in 10 minutes on 5 subjects, and then leave time for questions, because I think the questions are more important than maybe even the information. Is it on now? Okay, good. All right. Well, the 5 points I want to make are basically 5 points. One is bricks and clicks. Second one is last mile versus middle mile. The third point are technology platforms. The fourth point is costs and prices. And the fifth point is duties and service. The first point about bricks and clicks. When we talk about broadband, we're talking about broadband internet access service, or BIAS internet service. It consists of 2 things. It consists of the bricks, or the facilities that actually run to the consumer's home, office, or business. And then it consists of the clicks, or the services that the consumers can get over those things. So when people are talking about broadband, one must always remember, are they talking about the bricks, or are they talking about the clicks, or are they talking about both? When it comes to the bricks, about 90% of the last mile facilities running to every consumer's home, office, and business are generally owned by 2 industries, the telephone industry and the cable industry. Of those two industries, the one industry, the telephone industry, has a carrier of last resort universal service obligation to serve all consumers independent of cost. The other industries do not. Now, we get to the next question. What about the last mile versus the middle mile? Well, the last mile is a buzzword that refers to the line that runs from a consumer's home, office, or business to the central office of the telephone company or the head-end office of the cable company. The other phrase, the middle mile, is the network that connects other networks, or the networks that the phone company and the cable companies and the wireless companies and everyone else uses to communicate. Pennsylvania, for the most part, from what I have seen, does not have a middle mile problem. We seem to have enough middle mile facilities and networks of networks, cable company networks, telephone company networks, wireless company networks, satellite company networks. The biggest problem facing rural Pennsylvania, from what I can see and from what the FCC data shows, is last mile. That is the physical connection, the brick that runs from the home to the home office or business to the central office of the telephone company or the cable company. Now, what platforms are we using to provide those services? The third point. We have basically three platforms that seem to serve rural Pennsylvania. The wireline networks of the cable company or the phone company. We have the wireless networks when they're available, and you have the satellite networks. They're all equally capable of providing broadband. They are not all considered equal, according to most studies. For one thing, the FCC's last report under the administration that was just issued last month indicated that the problem with the satellite service is that it can offer good speeds, but it can't offer to everyone because of capacity constraints. The issue with the wireless is that the FCC's latest report has indicated wireless is not a substitute for wireline service. It's their phrase, not mine. It's not a complete substitute. The third point is that the wireline network basically offers what's considered to be unlimited scalability and robust networks. What that means is it can provide a lot of information, voice, data, and video. Now, what the FCC has said and what the research has shown, that wireless and wireline are both essential to have access to advanced services. What that means is one is not to the exclusion of the other, but that both are needed. And indeed, the FCC's funding efforts, the Connect America Fund, is to build wireline networks, and the Mobility Fund, or MF Fund, MF2, is to build wireless networks in high-cost rural areas. So even by the FCC's funding structure, you have both efforts underway. The next question I want to get to is, and I think you'll hear a lot of people arguing or presenting information suggesting that one is as good as the other. Well, the previous administration's report in 2016 and the current administration's report that was issued last month have both reiterated they're not the same. One is not a substitute for the other, but that you actually need both to have equivalent services. Now, what about costs and rates? Well, as I indicated in my information, the issue is really about the cost differential to serve rural areas, rural Pennsylvania. An example I gave was, if it costs $300 to serve rural Pennsylvania and $100 to serve urban Pennsylvania, historically what the policy was to add the prices together and divide by 2. 300 plus 100 equals 400. Everybody paid $200. But the problem was when we introduced, if you will, market pricing and market policy into the system, you had much competition and much changed quality of service. It's an area where the cost was $100, but the rate was $200. But in areas where it cost $300 and the rate was $200, you had less service. And that's the challenge facing the capital deployment costs. And again, it's the cost of financing the last mile network. It really isn't for us at this point in Pennsylvania the cost of financing a middle mile network. So there's a tension, if you will, between what I have referred to as policy pricing, which was the practice of putting together two costs, 300 plus 100, dividing by 2 and everybody paying 200, as opposed to what I refer to as market pricing, which is if it costs you $300, well, you pay $300, and if it costs you 100, you pay 100. And there's a real tension there. And that is because, in some respects, I get to the last point I want to make very quickly, which is it's a function of economics. It's not a function of people being unwilling or uninterested. It's really, in some respects, fundamentally, it is what I refer to as a clash of duties. The private corporations that are providing the services that we rely on have a primary fiduciary duty to maximize value for their shareholders. Their primary fiduciary duty is not necessarily to the public interest unless they can demonstrate that an investment is in the public interest. The public representatives, such as yourselves, however, have a different fiduciary duty. Your fiduciary duty, it seems to me, is to the public interest. It isn't always the same. So when corporations and private providers sometimes are reluctant to invest or reluctant to provide, it's not because they don't want to. It's because they could arguably legally breach their fiduciary duty to maximize value to their shareholders by providing services in place where the revenues may not necessarily cover the cost. It's not personal, it's economic, and it's a clash of those fiduciary duties. And the challenge, it seems to me, and it's your answer, not mine, is to figure out how to do that. And that brings me really to the last point I want to make, which is when we talk about this, we're talking about building networks to provide information to consumers and knowledge. And I'll just close with the comment that Alexander Pocock, who wrote The Machiavellian Moment, wrote that the founding of the American Republic was the last great act of the Renaissance. And so a republic like America depends upon the flow of information to consumers. And today, we depend upon networks to provide that information to consumers in ways that we didn't before. And so we have if you will, a 5-point challenge that you'll hear about. Bricks and clicks, last mile versus middle mile, technology platforms, and I keep coming back and saying wireless is considered essential, but not a substitute for wireline, cost versus pricing, and then finally, ultimately, when you hear from speakers, you're likely to hear different perspectives based upon their different fiduciary duties. And now I'll take questions.
I have a very simple question, and you taught me already more than what I ever knew about it. So we're way ahead of the game so far today. And I understand your position, but how could the legislature be helpful? I mean, other than money, I mean, is there some guidance legislatively that we could do that would say, guide people in the right direction?
Well, I'm not in a position to advise the legislature. I wouldn't pretend to. I think Chairman Brown would have my head, because she's firmly of the view that that's your prerogative, not mine. I'm just presenting the information to think about. It's a question of how you collectively see the future and how you approach the problem, knowing these 5 points. I don't have an answer for you. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to have one. The answer is I don't know. I mean, I'll give you information, but I have personal thoughts, but that's not important. I'm just here to really provide information.
Okay, thank you. Representative Causer.
Thank you, Chairman Yaw. A question came to mind. I appreciate the information that you've provided. A question came to mind regarding back in 2004 when we had the whole debate on Chapter 30 and how there was a requirement to make sure that there was broadband, or what was classified as broadband at that time, throughout the Commonwealth. And it made me think about this because you're talking about the difference between wireless and hardline. And in counties that I represent, take Potter for example, Verizon's answer to providing broadband access through the county was to put up numerous tower sites and provide wireless service to homes through those tower sites. And it seems to me there's still a gap there, in that there's still places I think that don't get the hardline coverage and still don't get a very good signal from the tower sites either. And I'm wondering, what's the Public Utility Commission's role in that? Did your commission have a role in making sure that that coverage was provided at that time, or was there no role for the PUC in that debate?
We did have a role, and as I indicated in the slides, Chapter 30 said that, and by the way, for the record, it was considered the most aggressive rural broadband program of its kind in the country at the time, and it relied primarily on private local rate increases to fund it. What it said was that upon completion of the company's plans, which are all completed, consumers are to get broadband within 10 days of a request. Availability. Availability it's availability at the speeds specified in the statute, which is 1.5 megabits down, 0.128 megabits up. Okay, it is not the current FCC speed of 3 megabits up, 25 megabits down, which has been referred to as the Netflix speed, because it's considered to be the speed you need to get Netflix. So that's the first answer. The commission has overseen those compliance plans, and the companies have come into compliance. And we have a piece of information, I think, is on our website that I referred to in the sheets, which explains to consumers that they have a legal right to broadband availability at those speeds within 10 days of request. Now, we are also technologically neutral in the ways that it's provided. And then if you go to the FCC's 2009 National Broadband Plan report and report since then, it's important to understand that at that time, the technology neutrality was better than it is now, because as the speeds go up, the options for the technology to provide it universally to all consumers in all locations at relatively comparable rates for comparable services goes down. The technological fields narrow, if you will. Does that answer your question?
It sort of does. I'm just wondering how did we determine that they were in compliance with the law back then? And I realize we're talking about 2004. It's dated, but how do we know that they complied? Was there an audit that took place at that time, or since then?
The companies filed compliance plans indicating what their plan was, what their proposal was, and it was for basically equal rural, urban, and suburban deployment. And then they reported on those. And then when they were done, they filed a certification, a verification under oath, if you will, that in fact it was available. And then we have since, under Chairman Brown's leadership, we put information on what the consumers, we call it the Broadband Bill of Rights, Consumers Bill of Rights, on the website, so that consumers can go on and find out, am I getting this at the Chapter 30 speeds? And if they don't, then they can contact the commission. But again, I want to emphasize, we do not enforce the federal speeds of 25.3 or 10.1.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Brame.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe, thanks for coming. Really appreciate it. I'm curious about this wireless versus fiber or hard asset difference. You made a comment that I think is very interesting. You said there is a role for wireless. Can we explore that? What is the role for wireless? If it is a limiting, if it has a limitation to it, what role do you, or is there for wireless in provisioning broadband service in the future?
I think the quick answer is yes. And if you go to the slides that I prepared the quotations from the FCC's reports in 2016 under President Obama and 2018, February of last month, under President Trump. And in both reports, they have said that one is not a complete substitute for the other, but you need both. And the reason for that is because, guess what? Most consumers aren't happy to just be sitting in their house getting broadband. They want it on their phones. They want it in the supermarket. They want it walking down the street. And that's the mobility piece of it. So that's when we talk about that, we talk about mobile broadband, mobile bias, and fixed wireline bias. And so they both do play a role. And for the record, the mobile bias, mobile broadband, relies very, very, very heavily on the wireline networks for what's called backhaul, so they can offload the huge volumes of demand that they're sending to consumers. So yes, they both play a role. And the FCC has two separate funds, a wireline fund, the Connect America Fund, and a mobility fund, phase 2, the MF2, which they're working out right now, to support the building of facilities in rural areas to build out wireless as well as wireline.
So, in summary, the story is, if somebody comes to you and says, well, we have a wireless network here, that's good enough. The answer is no.
I think I would just refer you to the FCC's findings and what they're supporting, and then ask the questions. Well, how is this consistent with that? And again, the representations it's a function of different fiduciary duties. I mean,
Right.
I'm just telling you what the technology and the reports have said.
So the FCC has clearly said no. That's not going to cut it.
Yes, paragraphs 15 through 19 of the February 2018 FCC Section 706 report came out and said, and I think I quoted the paragraph, we reject the view that wireless is a complete substitute for wireline. They've noted that it can do a lot of the things that wireline does, but it's not the same. And just for the record, the cell phone industry, the CTIA, the Industry Trade Association, filed a document, which I also quoted in my presentation, where they basically said we are not the same. We have certain limitations compared to the wireline network. And 5% of their users can consume 95% of spectrum.
Great, thank you.
Representative Kubulik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Whitmer, thank you for coming. You spoke about the utilities and the companies, I should say, having a duty to their shareholders. But don't they have an equal duty or even a greater duty as a public utility to the public to provide this?
Well, the answer is yes and no. And I know you'll hate that because I'm a lawyer. But the answer is yes, because they are certificated, if you will, under the sovereign authority of the Commonwealth and its assembly and the governor and the courts to serve the public, to be a public utility function. The public utility function is a service that is considered essential to the public, but they're also a private provider. So they have but their primary fiduciary duty is to their shareholders. And the reason that they also have a public utility certificate is because they were viewed as essential and oftentimes the only provider in their respective areas. And so they were granted a certificate. But now we grant certificates, and there are often more than one provider in the same area. So there's a tension, if you will, between the policy pricing that we could do when we could add the costs together and divide by 2 and charge everybody the same, as opposed to the entrance of other providers who don't have an obligation to serve everyone, but only want to serve certain portions of the same market. How you solve that problem is your challenge.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Our next panel is Thomas Freeman, the manager of Blue Ridge Communications, Mr. Al Quimby, the corporate account executive for Penn Teledata, and David Tews, the president of Indigo Wireless. Good morning. Whoever flipped the coin or drew the short straw can go first.
I'll draw the short straw. So my name is David Tews. I represent Indigo Wireless as its Executive Vice President, and Extreme Enterprises, which is a wireless internet provider, as its president. So I'm going to jump right in because we've been talking a lot about the difference between wireless and wireline. So, well, thank you, Chairman Yaw and the Center for Rural Pennsylvania for the opportunity this morning. I really appreciate the format today and what we're going to talk about. So I want to give you a little brief history about my companies, just so you understand who we are. So Indigo Wireless has been operating in rural Pennsylvania in Bradford, Tioga, Wyoming, Clinton, and Potter counties since 1992 as a cellular provider. We're not Verizon, we're not AT&T, we are a licensee of the FCC, and as Indigo Wireless, we are actually a partner of AT&T Wireless. So we have the FCC license, we operate the network, we have the towers, we have the infrastructure, but we provide service for AT&T customers as well as T-Mobile customers in rural Pennsylvania. It's a unique structure for today. Most places AT&T has built their own network and T-Mobile has as well. But in this area, they've built some of the network. We support them where they don't have towers. It's interesting, we've actually been here in rural PA since 1992, and in most areas, almost every town in this region, we were the first to build cellular service and to provide that service because we are focused just here in rural Pennsylvania. I'm sorry that we don't cover all of Potter County. And well, maybe Senator Scarnati, sometimes that's good, right? So, but that's who Indigo Wireless is. So I'm going to go off my testimony exactly as I was asked to do anyway. But as Indigo Wireless, a few years ago, we decided to do an experiment to see how we could provide wireless broadband to the consumers and to the residents of these areas. It took us a few years to go through this process, and we started in some small towns up in the Kawanesky Valley, Knoxville, and Osceola, places like that. Today, we've gone from an experimental project. About 2 years ago, we organized Extreme Enterprises, a separate company, and we started offering wireless broadband using terrestrial fixed broadband, which is slightly different than cellular. We actually have two separate networks. We have a cellular network to provide service to the wireless mobility portion, and we have a fixed wireless network that provide service just to the homes. The difference between what we're talking about with fixed wireless versus mobile wireless, fixed wireless uses the latest technology. It's called LTE-A or LTE Advanced. It actually uses something called MIMO, multiple in, multiple out technology, so that we can go through trees, around buildings, and we can have connectivity to buildings that with other technologies we didn't have the ability to do. So today we're serving, and I'm going to use Knoxville as my example, we're serving Knoxville, a town, approximately 620 some people live in the town. 62% of the households in Knoxville have service from us today. We're able to do this using this new technology, and we can deliver reliable speeds of 25 meg. We can do the Netflix speeds, and we do it regularly on a daily basis. We currently have a customer request waiting list of 1,400 people in this area, looking for service from us, looking for this gap that we're talking about today. We have the ability to do it in small chunks. What we need is the ability to move faster, and for that we need funding, and that's obviously what it all comes down to. We've been operating a business model without funding for years. We've actually never received any government subsidy to build our network. So we know how to do that, but it's slow. You have to, every single town has to have a business model, and as the towns get smaller, that model gets tougher, even for us. What I think we can offer is speed. Not speed to the home, but speed of deployment. We don't need years to build networks. We need months to build networks. And I think as a part of the conversation, I think that companies like Extreme, and as a matter of fact, their wireless internet providers are very, there's 2,500 wireless internet providers in the United States today, according to the Wireless Internet Service Providers Association. There's one in every county in rural Pennsylvania that I'm aware of, especially in this area. So a lot of them are small operators. The problem with small operators is we don't necessarily have the resources to go after federal funding or the legal staff. And so we make it on our own. But the message I want to give is we have the ability to deliver usable internet in a very short period of time. So I think it's important that we include the wireless internet companies as a part of the conversation. It's great to say we're going to deliver you in 10 years we're going to give you gigabit service, or in 3 years, or in 5 years. But working with the WISP companies in Pennsylvania, we can do it differently, and we can deliver it fast. We can deliver in months, and the people out there need it in months, not years. And we can't give gigabit. I don't know that we'll ever reach gigabit service in terrestrial fixed broadband, but we can deliver today. We're delivering 80 megabits over a fixed wireless technology, new technology. This year we'll hit 100 megabits. I'm sure of it because we're actually advancing our technology, and every year it continues to advance and improve. So, thank you.
Senator Scarnati, Senator Yacht, representatives and board members, thank you for coming to Tioga County. We appreciate you coming out here to see us. My name is Tom Freeman. I'm a regional manager for Blue Ridge Communications. Blue Ridge serves 15 counties in the state of Pennsylvania, while Penn Teledata and Al Quimby here with me serves 28 counties in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania. We're a middle mile and a last mile provider. My area of responsibility for Blue Ridge is from Potter County through Wyoming County along the Route 6 corridor. That's where I operate the broadband infrastructure that Blue Ridge has in this area. We operate under the corporate umbrella of Penn Core Services, and with me today is Al Quimby from Penn Teledata, which is also a Penn Core company. Penn Teledata provides commercial internet services over the Blue Ridge network, as well as partnering with other broadband partners in one of the largest private fiber networks in the country.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning. Welcome to Wellsboro. We're glad to have the opportunity this morning to come and talk to you folks. As Tom stated, my name's Al Quimby. I'm a corporate account executive with Penn Teledata. I help businesses connect. I live here in Wellsboro. Our corporate offices are down in the Lehigh Valley, so they affectionately refer to me as the outpost. When I first started, we jokingly talked about trying to provision T1 lines on barbed wire because we seem to have a lot of that up here. We never did get that to work. So, just want to tell you a little bit about PenTeleData and how we operate and what our business is about. PenTeleData is a partnership with several local communications companies. Our partners include Blue Ridge Communications, Ironton Telephone, and the 3 service electric companies. PenTeleData doesn't own any of our own facilities. We use our partners' facilities, whether it be fiber or cable, to provide the internet. So we're the commercial end of the business, and typically the partners handle the residential customers. And that's why Tom and I are presenting today. We work very closely together. We're constantly looking for new customers that we can service, whether it be commercial or residential. And in a lot of cases, we can feed off each other. If he builds out to a residential area and there happens to be a business there, I can service them, and vice versa. If I find a commercial customer that we can build to that benefits the residential customers along the way. PenTeleData Partnership was founded in 1994, and we've been providing high-speed internet in the eastern part of Pennsylvania and western part of New Jersey for about 24 years. So we're not a newbie to this. We've been doing this for quite a while. We have one of the largest privately owned fiber optic networks in the nation. We've deployed nearly 10,000 miles of fiber optic cable. We service many schools, hospitals, libraries, and commercial entities throughout our region. And this network, we built this with private funding. PenTeleData serves many rural communities, and we try to be on the leading edge of technology, and we're constantly improving our services on our network. Mansfield, PA was one of the first communities in the nation to have broadband cable modem service. When Blue Ridge and PenTeleData rolled that out, it was a whopping 500 kbps. We're constantly working to improve, and we recently invested in upgrades to our network, and we now offer broadband speeds up to 1 gig down in many of the areas that we service here in Potter, Tioga, Bradford, and Wyoming counties. Our company is built out into the rural areas where we could justify the cost to build. We're very aware of the roadblocks to providing high-speed internet to the rural areas in our region, and Tom will touch on that shortly. I had served for many years on a broadband advisory committee down in the greater Susquehanna Valley that was sponsored by CEDACOG, and our goal was to try to figure out how to get broadband internet out into the rural areas. We spent several years with that committee, and unfortunately, we did not come up with any really good, viable options. If it was cost-effective to build out to the more rural areas, somebody would have already done it. However, no one goes into business with the goal of breaking even. There are 2 main points I want to emphasize this morning. You have our testimony, and I just want to emphasize these 2 main points. The first point is that public monies should not be used to overbuild existing privately funded networks. Companies like PenTeleData have made significant investments in our infrastructure, and we've endeavored to build out into rural areas. Our decision to extend our cable and our fiber is usually based on an expectation of a certain return on investment. Nothing would undermine our efforts more than signaling to us that our returns on investment are uncertain or even in jeopardy. It's a waste of taxpayer money to overbuild an existing network. We saw this several years ago. There was money made available to an entity to build a fiber network in Pennsylvania. When I heard about that project, I called those folks and let them know that we have fiber into several of the entities that they were looking to build to, and that we could work with them, we could partner with them, and they could use our fiber that we had in place already to service a lot of those entities. And I was told, no, our mandate is we want our own private fiber network. So there was a large chunk of federal dollars that was put into that network, and now we are actually competing with them in the areas that we both covered together. So a little bit of an unfair playing field there. The second point is the emphasis should be on last mile projects and should focus on the unserved areas. Building a middle mile network will be of no use if the last mile is not there. A middle mile network without a plan for the last mile is a road to nowhere. And thank you again for the opportunity to come before you, and we're hoping to learn as well And I'm going to turn it back over to Tom.
Thanks, Al. As you may have read in our written testimony, one of the major hurdles for a wireline company is access to poles in reasonable timeframes and with reasonable costs. We must make applications for pole attachments to the pole owners. This process can take 30 to 90 days. After that application's complete, then the next step is referred to as the make-ready process. The pole owners must complete the work that permit the attachment in the communication space on their poles, which easily takes another 30 to 90 days to the process. The pole attachment process is not only time-consuming, but it's also costly. And I'd like to share just a couple examples, one residential and one commercial. We recently constructed a fiber-to-the-home last-mile build in Gaines Township in Tioga County. Our technology would have allowed us to extend the plant to an additional 11 customers with no construction cost to those customers. Those 11 customers would have had service by extending our facilities for 3,000 feet. The telephone company had 23 separate make-ready charges on 13 poles for a total cost of $14,906, or an additional $4.96 a foot, in excess of our construction cost. Those costs made the plant extension prohibitive, and the build has been canceled. Keep in mind, these 11 customers were on toward the last mile, and they could have had fiber to the home, which is unlimited bandwidth for an unlimited future. The second example is a commercial application which we worked with Penteledata. There's a manufacturing facility in Westfield, and they asked us to provide an internet circuit in an area where the incumbent telephone company couldn't provide enough bandwidth to meet their business needs. To serve them, there were make-ready on 6 poles. 4 of those 6 poles were power poles. 6 of the poles were power poles. 4 of them simply needed a wire raised on them. 2 poles required replacement, and 1 telephone company pole had to be replaced. After 120 days to get the cost for that, we received a total make-ready cost from the 2 utilities of $48,898, or $8,149 per pole. First of all, the company couldn't wait 120 days for an answer. They had a contract that was going to be renewed with their incumbent provider, that they needed to make a decision. It took us 120 days to get an answer on the make-ready costs, let alone if they'd have decided to pay that, they would have had to go out and do that same construction, and they wouldn't even give us the time for that construction. Certainly, it probably would have been at least another 120 days. That opportunity left for a year. Fortunately, the company came back to us a year later and said, is there anything that you guys can do for us? We have needs that our company just needs bandwidth, and it can't be provided. So we went to Westfield Community TV Antenna Association, and we created an overlash agreement with them, and we were able to get around the make-ready issues for the pole, and we served this company. Now, a year later, the incumbent telephone company is telling them to come back to us. They have needs for some advanced telephone services that the switch in Westfield will not permit them to use, so we're offering them PRI technology as we speak today. In summary, I think you can see how the pole access issues affect wired companies' ability to expand in the last mile. I didn't even mention right-of-way concerns and also the time and expense that adds to line extensions. Another significant issue is companies who attach to the poles without the owner's consent. This causes congestion on the poles and unnecessary make-ready costs by a company who wants to attach to them legally. This is a significant issue, and it needs a resolution. There are many obstacles in delivering service to the last mile, and they're outlined in our written testimony. As you listen to potential solutions going forward, you may want to ask, why isn't your entity already serving the last mile with your technology or your proposed solution? Beware of outlandish promises by companies offering high-tech solutions. Please ask, do they have a customer base? Do they have back-office billing? Do they have the technical support and the financial wherewithal to sustain their solution and support their customers over time? Hopefully, we've provided some of the answers from a wireline provider's long-standing experience in an effort to making a build out toward the last mile. We appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thank you for coming to Wellsboro, and be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Senator Scarnati.
Thank you. I find it maybe a little bit amusing that the standard we use is Netflix speed. So can I ask, the service you provide is at Netflix speed?
It is.
It is.
We
So-
offer service at anywhere from 10 down and 1 up to 1 gig down and 40 up.
Okay. So how do your monthly rates compare to what would be an urban, national, regional provider?
I would say, probably the standard that you're talking about might be Verizon's Fios product. Obviously density in homes passed provides for an opportunity for a greater revenue return. So they have the same investment that we have, and they may be passing 50, 100 homes per mile with that product. We try to think we can break even at 15. So, I think that we offer a fair price. You can get our high-speed internet from 10 meg from $39 up to $129 for a gig. Now that's if you have our cable service. If you don't have our cable service, there's an additional fee to those entities.
But with a waiting list of 1,400,
Yes.
your rates must be competitive.
We offer, let's call it Netflix speed, which is actually, it's the first time today I heard that, but it's a good measure, because if you purchase our 10 megabit package, your Netflix is not going to be a good experience. So 25 megabits is a realistic number, I think, for downloading Netflix and watching movies, which I think we all know it's over 50% of our data usage actually is Netflix. So I think it's actually a good place to look. But our 25 megabit plan is $59 a month.
Okay. So it leads me to my question. I've heard both Al and yourself talk about this has all been done with private dollars.
Correct.
Okay. Is there an aversion to taking government dollars?
No, not at all. I debated for a long time and talked with my attorneys and looked at different opportunities for the Connect America Fund. And at the end of the day, we decided to pass. The bars were too high as far as serving 100% of the people and the cost of getting to one. There's not enough money, in my mind, to commit to the Connect America Fund dollars for rural Pennsylvania. If I had all of the dollars that were available, take away the fact that it's a reverse auction where the lowest bidder actually receives the money, I don't think I could do it. It's not enough. And that's why I passed. So there's not an aversion to it, but it's sometimes the requirements that come along with that money that I can't actually deliver. So I pass.
It just occurs to me, a model that was done back in, I don't know, 1930s, the rural electrification.
Right.
Many of our farms, many of our rural areas, without it, would probably still be generating electric some archaic way. Isn't in a lot of this sense a federal, mandate? How do we, Pennsylvania is not the only rural state in the nation, and how do we, you're talking a lot of dollars. We've got a Commonwealth right now that is struggling with just meeting its cost of care for elderly and pension costs. This has to be, what is the cost for you, can you tell me, to build out a maximum network in the region that you are now providing for? What is that cost? And then I'm done with questions. I'm sorry, Chairman, I asked more than one.
You want to start, Tom?
Well, I can tell you from a wireline company, I think you could average a cost of about $20,000 per mile. And so you can see what kind of rate of return you have to have. So the homes passed and the take rate has to be significant. I think the rural electric co-ops, as you state, there may be some hybrid solutions as we move this thing down the road, that we start partnering with some of those entities and look at not trying to reinvent the wheel for everybody. And I don't think you're going to have a one solution answer for any of this. And I don't know how you reach those guys over in Ole Bowl State Park area as a student of the Gelton Area School District or something like that. They're out there. And I don't think that there's going to be one solution short of Elon Musk covering the world.
But I'm looking for a number of the regions that you folks represent to reach a reasonable build-out. What does that cost? What would you need to make your business model work above and beyond your private funds?
I think that the first step might be for, and we try to work together, and we all compete and we all work together at the same time. But I think that we need to maybe, we need to start by working together more. I could have provided that Westfield solution, that last part for Tom probably inexpensively, and it could have been a partnership where I step in for a year or two and then Tom builds his network. So there are things like that that we can probably do. But to answer your question about cost, I have a really small community right along the New York State border that's been just asking and asking and asking, can you bring us broadband internet? And we looked at that town. I think there's maybe 25 homes, and I'm not positive of that. But to reach out and get those last 25 homes, it would probably cost us, because we're talking about poles, towers, infrastructure, $80,000. And that's when you get into the really small areas, and now I have to build a tower. So, because I can't reach there with my existing towers.
Well, what's important, and I'll end with this, is we need to put a number on what this problem costs. And you've got to either work to the number or work back from the number, but you need a number, and I think that's important for us, at least for me, as somebody that wants to help solve the problem. What's it going to cost?
Senator, I just want to jump in. So one of the things we have to, I think, look at is what is the goal? Is the goal to provide broadband internet to every household or every building? We have a lot of areas where there's seasonal residences. So are we including those seasonal residences? They may be sold next year to somebody that wants to move up here and bring their family and make it a permanent residence. So I think that's one of the questions, is what exactly is the goal? And then once you make that goal, a lot of it can go back to take rate. You can build this network and extend the plant past all these houses, but not all of them will take the service. Eventually they may. The other thing that we see is in many cases where we build into an area and provide high-speed internet, they say they want high-speed internet, but then sometimes when they see the cost, well, I'm only paying $30 now for my Verizon DSL, you're charging me $50, maybe I don't want to pay the $50, maybe I'll just stay with the DSL. The other consideration is it's not just about building out, there's maintenance costs involved. You have to maintain those facilities, so it's not a once and done cost. Yesterday with all the wind, I was sitting in Tom's office and the supervisor came in and they were talking about trees coming down on the lines. So there's a lot of maintenance issues, so it's not just a once and done kind of thing. So it's a broad question.
I'd just follow up a little bit on Senator Scarnati's line of questioning. If I recall correctly, both of us have very rural districts. And my recollection is I think my population density is 70 people per square mile. Senator Scarnati's, I think, is 40, if I'm not mistaken, people per square mile. So, I mean, that's part of the problem we face. One thing, though, that's become, just listening to what you have said here today, I almost get the feeling that maybe there is something that the legislature could do, not money-wise, but I get the feeling, Mr. Freeman, that one of the issues here is people aren't playing nice in the sandbox together.
I think there's a lot of truth to that, and I think you can ask some of the poll owners that as we go in. It's very difficult for me, and I've run into this time and time again. If you look at a lot of the polls as you drive by them, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, there was a lot of space on those poles in the communication space. Now you have long-haul providers going through this area. You have different entities wanting to serve different things, and that pole space has been congested. And one of the things from a company that really tries to do the pole application process by the numbers is I'm sitting watching a contractor hang fiber on a pole that I've applied for that he has not, and he moves my wire out of the way. Now I have to go pay the power company $9,000 a pole to replace that pole. And they just go on there and they ask for forgiveness rather than for permission. And that's made it very difficult for a provider who wants to do it legitimately and by the numbers to access pole space. And maybe you'll hear a little bit more about that later. But that is a significant issue that I think needs an answer, and that may be something that you could help with.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. It's very informative.
Thank you.
The next panel is Craig Ecker, the President and CEO of Tri-County Rural Electric, Tony Ventella, the Executive Director of the Progress Authority, and Eric Bridges, the Executive Director, North Central Regional Planning and Development Commission. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Who's up?
Good morning.
You can't take all the time, Tony.
Okay, I'm sorry. We'll move quickly. I want to first thank the Center of Rural Pennsylvania for its Board of Directors and its Board of conducting today's hearings. The Progress Authority is a regional voice for economic development. The Progress Authority is certified designated economic development agency for Bradford and Susquehanna counties. It is a grassroots economic development agency formed by local business people and government as a true public-private partnership. 2018 also marks the Progress Authority's 25th year as an IDA, IDC, and general purpose authority. Like many economic development groups, it strives to facilitate private investment and job support. The Progress Authority identifies key issues that must be overcome to promote true economic development, and its leadership continually meets the area business leaders and officials to identify vital needs to improve rural development. We are very aware and have reviewed the Center of Rural Pennsylvania's assessments and surveys on broadband detailing the challenges of rural communities. The northern tier counties are among some of the geographically largest in the state. It is no secret that lack of capacity for useful and reliable broadband is plaguing many of our rural counties. Like many rural service delivery systems, there are not enough residents and businesses along the vast stretches of roadway doesn't make a service-driven plan work. It's no secret that for many years, telephone companies have relied upon subsidies to assist them in their provision of last-mile service. Still, gross deficiencies and widespread affordable coverage persist because insufficient attention has been paid by the commercial sector and relevant governmental agencies to the widening gap in the middle mile infrastructure. The stakes could not be more serious and unfortunately contribute to the Progress Authority's interrelated concerns over inadequate public safety, desperate access to governmental and educational service, haphazard or non-existing recourse to telehealth and other personal and business activities of daily living, and lagging rural economic development. Farmers and rural families struggle with inadequate service. However, both the lack of middle mile investment and the increase in bandwidth demand have created a dilemma that far exceeds any one issue for rural communities. Rural citizens, governments, schools, and businesses have no less need for quality, reliable broadband than anyone else. Like it or not, our lives now revolve around quality broadband. Unfortunately, traditional subsidies have been targeted to internet service providers in hopes that funding them will result in increased end-user bandwidth. In many cases, when funding becomes available, it requires a minimum speed and timetable for development. However, although we in Bradford County have waited 10 years for private sector development, the 2008 standards of 1.5 megabytes have not been reached. Our experience in Bradford and Susquehanna counties has been that supporting the service providers without targeted time-sensitive deliverables in the way of middle-mile infrastructure investments has not resulted in any considerable improvements to broadband accessibility. The Progress Authority has been told by service providers that speeds our businesses and residents realistically need cannot be met with meaningful time frame or meaningful rates. Adding insult to injury, there is also a digital chasm between the minimum standard speeds for bandwidth, as defined by the FCC and state laws, and what is realistically required for a number of connected devices in today's businesses and households. Thus, collectively, the digital divide in the Progress Authority's jurisdiction broadens. Because the state's government aspirations remain diffuse, the standards to which the providers are held are not meaningfully updated for modern demands, and expectations of service providers remain unclear or incomplete. Collectively, these problems have resulted excuse me, in the infrastructure money and the service providers may have available to them not being used efficiently due to the difficulty for service providers to provide both the middle and last mile projects, based upon many other things on the number of users per mile and service coverage. The role of fiber optics. I want to hand you guys each a piece of fiber optic cable. I don't know if you may have seen it already, but this is a 12 pair, it's a small pair. There's 12, it's a 6 pair, excuse me, it's 12 fiber optic pieces of glass in there. I want to just keep in mind that one of those fibers will light the entire county. In the opinion of the Progress Authority, the rural dilemma described above could be improved, if not eliminated, with appropriate public-private partnership, committed to the construction of critical middle mile, which does not truly exist currently. In light of ever-increasing modern demands and unavoidable topography and diffuse population of northern Pennsylvania, there is no substitute for fiber optics as the foundation to support numerous forms of communication with unlimited capacity. From the day it was invented, fiber optics has been standard technology regime under which the vast majority of all telecommunications and related applications continue to be developed to this day. Because of this fact, fiber optics and technology backed by fiber will continue to be the highest and best uses of funds for broadband development. While it would be admittedly a long-term investment, funding for middle mile development with the potential for virtually limitless extensibility and growth is critical. If the middle mile is available, various types of end users could take advantage of otherwise unavailable or extremely expensive and limited service, and with the advantage that bring Pennsylvania firmly into the 21st century. The Progress Authority has a proposed solution. I could go on about our poor service and issues with broadband. However, I am here to propose a solution. Knowing that there are so many interested parties between electric infrastructure, natural gas, governmental and public safety bodies, educational entities, and the public, it only makes sense to facilitate all of these by developing the middle mile, thus changing various cost structures. Recognizing the critical problem, the Bradford County Commissioners commissioned a detailed engineering study through the Progress Authority in February of 2017. After consultation with engineering and legal professionals, the Progress Authority has been, for the past year, taking steps to develop what it dubs the Bradford County Open Access Network. The Bradford County Open Access Network, once developed, would be a fiber optic middle mile addition to the network to improve connectivity throughout Bradford County. This strategic network will specifically construct a truly redundant middle mile that private sector has been able and unwilling to construct. With the development of redundant dark fiber loops throughout Bradford County, the Progress Authority can construct a long-lasting, self-healing backbone to support all means of communication. Emergency services, microwave, cell phone tower service, and wireless communication will be directly strengthened with a well-positioned and impactfully sized fiber optic network. Using the backbone of our electrical distribution system, phase 1 of the area's specific engineering design is complete, and the submission of 3,000 pole permits has taken place. The Progress Authority has also requested a PUC declaratory order to determine whether the dark fiber infrastructure would be deemed a public utility or whether any particular permission from the local exchange carriers is necessary. Interestingly, in conjunction with the PUC filing, the Progress Authority notified the Bradford County's local exchange carriers of its request, those LECs, to offer broadband speeds of 10 gigs for commercial customers and 1 gig for residential customers to gauge their willingness to provide those speeds. The responses have been less than hopeful, though not entirely unexpected. Building out fiber networks in our area anytime in the near future apparently does not fit their business models. Their target returns on investment are not met in rural areas. Where the LECs do not tread, the Progress Authority will. It will construct what the last mile service providers do not want to construct due to the high cost and the sparse rural density. The redundant dark fiber network will be open to all last mile providers and those who will light it themselves. This opens the possibility for existing smaller service providers to compete, as well as bringing additional service providers to the area. The only condition is that no one user can occupy the majority of the network's resources. I spoke earlier of Phase 1. The Bradford County Open Access Network is proposed in 3 phases. As mentioned, Phase 1 is in implementation right now. Phase 2 and 3 are intended to go into final design in the coming year. All 3 phases are estimated to cost $10 million in total. Additionally, Susquehanna County is awaiting funding for planning, engineering, and ultimate construction of their own network. We recognize that no funding source can accomplish this alone. That is why public-private funding mix is critical. We ask that serious consideration be given to providing rural funding for middle-mile construction available to governmental agencies, nonprofit organizations, or private companies, in recognition of the fact that purely private infrastructure development is only profit-driven and to date has not adequately happened in our rural areas. Much like sewer and water infrastructure, broadband infrastructure development needs to be subsidized, as has been proven in other parts of the United States. The critical component now is investment in the rural model that has been developed in Bradford County. With careful engineering, and the model can be duplicated throughout rural Pennsylvania. Let us support service providers by constructing what has not made good business sense for last mile providers. Quality broadband is well beyond a useful amenity. It's critical to everyone's life. While this topic is very important to my career, it is even more important to a personal life of one of my colleagues, Chris Brown. He and his wife have 4 daughters, one of which has a terminal illness, Lee's syndrome, which is a mitochondrial disease. This disease affects her body's ability to create energy, which in turn everyday tasks make tasks nearly impossible, including breathing on her own. She has a tracheotomy and a ventilator, and is also wheelchair bound. She also is very compromised immune system, and traveling out in the public is very dangerous to her health. The Browns are currently able to care for in their home through the use of home nursing and technology. All of their equipment is Wi-Fi enabled and can be read and calibrated by their medical team from their offices, making necessary travel less of an obstacle. When her health deteriorated to the point of needing a tracheotomy, she was in the hospital for 2 months. This would not have been released to bring her home if they didn't have access to this technology. While her challenges in prognosis are difficult, their daughter is still 7 years old at heart, and she has a very strong desire to attend school and have friends like her own twin sister. With her condition, actually attending school was impossible, so they researched a way that she would be able to enjoy the classroom experience and not have to be exposed to the germs of public school. They found a solution that gave them everything they were looking for. She utilizes a robot that stays in the classroom and controlled by his daughter at home via an iPad device. She can see, hear, and interact with the teacher and her fellow students, and they can enjoy the same interaction with her. The robot easily controlled and moves freely throughout the school by utilizing her iPad. It has been a huge success. She is thriving even in her less than ideal circumstances. This was the only way possible, was because of adequate broadband internet service. When the Browns started with the robot, they had a cable internet that was more than capable of handling bandwidth at speed requirements to run the system. A year ago, the family moved to a house that was not serviced by cable internet. They were forced to go to a DSL on their own option. To ensure that they had reliable and dedicated broadband internet, the family had to go through extraordinary measures to install a bonded line to their house. They were fortunate to be near one of the few telecommunication cabinets in the county that is actually fed by fiber and not copper. If they were not near this cabinet, they would not have had adequate internet service to run her medical equipment and her robot technology. There are many families in our community that are not as fortunate as we are. Their only option was spotty, unreliable DSL service, and while their needs are not typically life and death, their everyday lives are hindered by unreliable service. Finally, my wife recently sat in front of her home computer and was very frustrated with her inability to pay our internet phone bill online. After numerous failed attempts, she resorted to calling the customer service representatives on her phone. What made her even more angry, and you don't want to be around when she's like that, was that the only solution that the provider suggested was that to set up an automatic payment for our bill. She said, I'll be damned before she sets up a guaranteed payment for lousy service. Even more upsetting is the amended service contract that was attached to the bill from the service provider that changes the terms and conditions of the contract. Due to poor connectivity, my wife was unable to download the amended contract. Upon assessing the contract at a location that actually was adequate internet service, we found that some terms changed drastically. There is no longer guaranteed minimum speed under the contract. It indemnifies the service provider. The revision makes the customer waive their rights to legal action against the provider, including class action lawsuits. The customer automatically agrees to new terms and conditions by merely paying their bill. How ironic both of these circumstances are to both parties. The service is so poor that you have difficulty even paying your bill, and you cannot actually download the new customer agreement. But by paying your bill, you agree to allow for this poor service. What is a customer to do? I thank you for your opportunity to present today's testimony.
Thank you.
I'd just like, Mr. Matz, I'm sorry that I did not introduce you as part of this panel. I was using an old agenda.
That's fine.
And my staff, updated me with the new one, and I wasn't using the new one, so. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Yaw, Senator Scarnati, Representative Kovalik, and Representative Causer, and members of the Center for Rural Pennsylvania. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today to discuss broadband availability, accessibility, and affordability in rural Pennsylvania. I'm Eric Bridges. I'm the Executive Director of the North Central Pennsylvania Regional Planning and Development Commission. North Central is one of 7 what are known as local development districts in Pennsylvania, collaborating with a diverse group of talented partners to build better lives, better communities, and thriving businesses in rural Pennsylvania. In many ways, broadband of today bears similarity to the railroads of the 1800s and rural electrification during the 1930s. In the case of the railroads, a tremendous investment of time and materials was required to develop what at the time was cutting-edge infrastructure, with the eventual value of that investment derived not from the infrastructure itself, but from the economic ecosystem that grew and evolved around it. The impact of the railroad became defined not by connecting distant points on a map, but by creating opportunity where none existed, by enabling existing enterprise to grow, and by influencing how rural communities viewed themselves in the broader economic landscape. In much the same way that railroads opened up commerce along rural America and expanded the focus of municipal economies to the scale of products and services regionally and nationally, so too did rural electrification. By the mid-1920s, most cities in America received electricity from either privately owned or municipal utility companies. Running wires into rural areas where very few people resided was uneconomical. The electrical divide that resulted fueled the difference in standards of living between urban and rural and limited rural America's ability to participate in an emerging modern economy. The big rural electrification push of the 1930s and 40s produced unprecedented efficiencies in work and vastly increased the quality of life of rural Americans. As was the case with the railroads in the 19th century and electrification in the 20th century, today technology has emerged as the critical determinant in how businesses operate, how institutions provide services, and where consumers choose to work, live, and play. The success of a community has become dependent on how broadly and deeply they adopt technology, which includes access to reliable, high-speed broadband. As noted in the National Broadband Plan, broadband is a foundation for economic growth, job creation, global competitiveness, and a better life. Despite the growing dependence on and desire for technology, the United States Census reports that 27% of Americans do not have high-speed connection at home. Studies also indicate that 19.1 million children do not have broadband at home, and 6.1 million of those children live in low-income households. Additionally, these studies estimate that at least 1.5 million businesses, 20% in the United States, do not use broadband technology today. Why does broadband matter? Recent research suggests a profound relationship between the overall well-being of a community and the digital divide that exists in that community. Communities with robust access, adoption, and use are generally doing better. Between 2001 and 2010, income grew faster and unemployment grew slower in rural counties with home internet adoption rates higher than 60%. During the same period, rural counties with home internet adoption rates lower than 40% lost more businesses and more jobs than counties with higher rates of adoption. Employees who do not telework in any capacity tend to have incomes that are 75% of that of their teleworking neighbors. Rural counties with at least 2 broadband technologies available have experienced significant in-migration compared to rural counties without broadband. One study found that 50% of K through 12 students surveyed said they couldn't complete the homework they had due to lack of an internet connection. Telemedicine applications are estimated to add over $500,000 to rural economies, reduce hospitalizations of nursing home patients, and general significant savings for Medicare. 2/3 of new jobs created between 2010 and 2016 required medium to high digital skills, with 1.1 billion jobs globally being automated today. Small businesses with faster internet connections tend to have higher proportion of employees with advanced technology skills compared to those with lower speeds. In this environment, deploying broadband infrastructure, services, and applications, as well as supporting the universal adoption and meaningful use of broadband are challenging, but required to advance 21st century technologically empowered communities. From healthcare, agriculture, public safety and tourism, to government, education, libraries, talent, and economic activity, every sector of a community requires the power of broadband and related applications to function at its highest capacity. One thing is clear: broadband and related technologies have transformed nearly every facet of society. While many of these technology changes can be discussed on a global scale, rural community broadband advancements cannot and will not occur without creative community leadership and extensive collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, Senator Yaw, Senator Scarnati, Representative Cowser, the board. I really appreciate this opportunity. Can you folks hear me? Okay?
Yeah.
There we go. That's better. I appreciate this opportunity to speak with the board and have this great opportunity. My name is Craig Ecker. I'm the president and CEO of Tri-County Rural Electric Cooperative, also the president of one of our subsidiaries, Wellsboro Electric. And as you all probably experienced a windstorm last night, I was keeping my fingers crossed that we're going to keep the lights on. It was pretty rough out there, and let me tell you, we have a great and talented group of linemen and employees, and they really did a great job and got everybody restored. So big shout out to those folks. Tri-County was formed in 1937. We have 3,300 miles of power lines. We cover about 5,000 square miles in very rural territory in northern Pennsylvania. And much of that is in Senator Scarnati's territory, Senator Yaw, Senator Cowser, and I believe Representative Cowser, Representative Everett, I think part of Lycoming County. Is that a part of your territory? Beautiful territory, let me say. And I heard a few comments made about seasonal residences, and I can testify, talking with many of those seasonal residences, that they would love to stay in those residences during the summer and work from there. We have some beautiful homes down the Kettle Creek, down the Pine Creek, but there's no connectivity. And these folks are professionals in the Pittsburgh metro area, the Philadelphia metro area, Baltimore. They just can't do it. They don't have the connectivity. Tri-County is a not-for-profit rural utility. When I say that, our board members are democratically elected by the members they serve. Any margins, profits that are in excess are allocated back to the members. I think this arrangement gives us a pretty unique position to have an understanding of some of the folks in the rural areas of Pennsylvania and what their needs and their desires are. Over the past few years, we've had many members telling us that they feel like they're being left behind in this digital divide. They're adamant that it's affecting their health care, it's affecting their educational opportunities. We're hearing it from farmers that they just don't have the connectivity to become more efficient and compete in this competing agricultural economy. I think what it does is it basically makes them feel, and I hate to say this, like a second-class citizen compared to the rest of Pennsylvanians in the urban and suburban areas. Like many other rural electric cooperatives across the nation, and right now 30 of my colleagues are heading down this road, and they have headed down this road, they've attempted to try to meet this call, kind of like what we did back in the 1930s. They're meeting the demand for bringing rural broadband into areas that just really don't make sense economically. I think we heard some of the folks testifying at 15 customer per mile density. Our customer density, our member density is about 6, not even 6 members per mile. So you can see what the difficulty will be, and that's including seasonals in that number too. So what happened is that we started investigating what we could do, leveraging our colleagues across the country and what their successes have been, and we started looking at what it would take for us, the cooperative, to run fiber throughout our whole entire system. We started looking at it primarily from maybe a selfish standpoint. What do we need to make our system more reliable? How do we communicate with our equipment that's out on the lines? We call it smart grid. It has intelligence. It's not smart unless you can talk to it. And so we started looking at what it would take to start running this fiber. Once we did that, we realized if we have this in place, we can offer fiber to the home to all these rural customers at a very, very competitive price. We started getting a lot of feedback from memberships. We started doing surveys. And let me say, the desire and the need from our members is there. And at our annual meeting, it comes up all the time. When's it coming out to our home? When are we going to get it? So we launched this about 2 years ago. We did the pro formas and we did all the studies. And let me say, the economics, like you heard from other panels, and I know you folks are all very intelligent, it's ugly. The economics are ugly at that density. So I do think it's more like a rural electric kind of movement to make this happen. We are participating in the Federal Communications Connect America Fund auction. We filed our short form a couple weeks ago. As we would have suspected, the territory that Tri-County serves, which is very rural, is also very rich in census block groups that are coming up for auction. So we're optimistic that we think we will do quite well in that. The bottom line is to bring service to about 22,000 homes that we would pass. It's about an $80 million price tag, to throw a number out on it. That's what our number was. To make it work in our business model, we needed about $30 million to make this happen. Co-ops are very accustomed to working with slim margins and working with smaller staffs and making this happen. I will say the only way I believe it will happen, though, even if we go down the road and we get the funding, which I'm somewhat optimistic about, it's going to be a collaboration of talents. We're already reaching out to some of the local communication companies to try to collaborate with them, the fixed wireless companies. I think it's a collaboration of all entities to make this work. There's some areas that may not make any sense at all to run 5 miles of fiber to one home. That's where maybe the wireless comes in. So we're working down that road. Hopefully we'll have some good news with the CAF 2 auction. We also have a request in to the Commonwealth for a RACP grant to kickstart our project over in Potter County. That's where we want to launch this. Many of our requests are coming out of that area in the southern Potter County, northern Potter County, and as anybody can see also, Potter County needs some job creation too, and we hope we can help with that and launch this project over there. Saying that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I really appreciate the privilege to be able to speak with this board, and I'm encouraged to bring broadband to rural Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Thank you all for allowing us to come up and speak to you today. My name's Ed Matz. I'm the Technology Director for North Central Regional Planning. One of my jobs is to actually keep our wide area network up and running, which we've expanded to cover about 11 counties now. One of the things that we see with keeping these networks alive is you need partnerships. You need to be able to work with everyone that's out there. One of the things that we've been able to do is we've actually forged partnerships with the state. State Police, Game Commission, DCNR. Without those partnerships and the use of some of those assets, I mean, the state has tons of assets out there that you cannot get access to. It's very complicated to get any access to those facilities. One of the things that would actually be very beneficial, and I don't know if anyone's ever brought it up, is a study on all the vertical assets that are in Pennsylvania. All the towers, who owns the towers? Are those people willing to play with wireless internet providers? Virginia has done that, and they have a site out there, and it is very comprehensive. So if that would be something that could well be funded and actually be useful. Because when we go into an area, we got to do a lot of our own due diligence and find those tower sites. And some of them are hard to find. Even if you know where it's at, you can't get to it. The other issue that we run into is the density of backhaul providers. You go to Pittsburgh, you got 10 providers to choose from. We have 1, maybe 2. And then we have to negotiate with them. Sometimes they negotiate in good faith. Sometimes they don't negotiate in good faith. We've worked partnerships with those folks to actually get very good pricing. But it's taken 18 years to actually get some of this stuff in place. One of the other things that I've seen through some of the meetings that I've gone to is we fund a lot of industrial parks. But what do you do in industrial parks? You put water, you put gas, you put electric. You skip the broadband. You come back in, you get business, so what are they doing? Tearing up the roads, putting in more conduits. Why didn't we do it up front? Why didn't a contractor install fiber that it gets to every building, takes it to a central location, then whatever provider comes in can tap that fiber and get it installed? For additional grants, I think that's very beneficial that that could happen. Our network is actually a hybrid network. We actually have fiber and we have fixed wireless. Most of what we do is fixed wireless. I give an example of one of our projects. A few years ago, in conjunction with the state police and DCNR, we got internet, we got broadband internet into Cook Forest, which was in turn to use the 50-some-year-old fire tower that was no longer really in use other than for people to climb. Had no electric in it, so we had to put solar panels on it. We put electricity in it, and now we service the Gateway Lodge, Black Bear Cabins, Macbeth Cabins, and Pale Whale. So there's a lot of opportunities out there, but you need those partnerships of people to work with. And I was just trying to give you some examples. That's why I was here, to give you some examples of what could be done. But think about the partnerships out there. And we've talked with Craig, and we may try to be a partner with what Craig's doing. Thank you.
Representative Kubulik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ventello, you talked about the need for the middle leg, or the earlier, and I don't want to start a wrestling match between yourself and Mr. Quimby if he's still here, but he talked about the last mile being most important, which piqued my interest in, and duplication of services on the middle mile. But you're talking about the middle mile being the most important here, or could you explain that a little bit?
Sure. Any technology is only as good as the pipe that serves it. Mm-hmm. In our case, the middle mile does not truly exist. So in the event that somebody wants to put in wireless, or even the last mile is only as good as what it's connected to, and typically it's connected to copper. That's been the subsidized entity for forever. So without fiber, none of it can be augmented, including wireless. Microwave can be strengthened. Cell towers fed by fiber can be more efficient. So the point is that I think the term was, you said a middle mile is a road to nowhere. It's not. We have several. It's the area that the private providers do not want to build because it does not make economic sense for them.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Ecker, real quick, if you would, Mr. Chairman, one more quick question. There's an article talking about publicly owned internet networks allowing some of these communities to surpass some of the rural communities being able to surpass urban areas in their service. Would what you talked about be similar to a publicly owned network, if you're familiar with that at all?
Well, let me just say that the network we're proposing would be like what they call FiOS. I would anticipate that our rural areas would probably have better internet than many of the other areas that you would see across the state, except in the urban, suburban areas. Once you put fiber into the home, that's the last mile. Once you bring that in, the bandwidth is unlimited. It's basically limited by the equipment that you have on either end of that fiber. One of the hopes that we would do is try to enable, like I said, a collaboration and make it somewhat open with our regional providers. Because obviously we're looking at our membership. That's who we're trying to serve. There's a lot of folks outside our service territory that still don't have service. And I would hope with the collaboration and partnerships between fixed wireless who could jump on our fiber to give them the backbone that they need, or other cable companies or telcos, that they could jump on that too and expand their networks. I think that's how you kind of bridge that gap. You got to be open, to allow other technologies to use it. I don't think we're the only solution. Let me say that.
Thank you.
Senator Scarnati.
Yeah, I'd just like to raise an issue that is an option, and it's not only this panel, but the previous panel. Several legislative sessions ago, we created what is known now as the P3 Commission, Public-Private Partnership Commission, that can solicit or receive type of bids for infrastructure. Now, at the time, we envisioned this for possibly limited access tolled highways, rail lines, but infrastructure of technology as this falls within that. And I think that we need to have a conversation about the prospects of using the P3 Commission in these rural areas to bring in those private dollars, the public-private partnerships, in order to help facilitate this. But we have a mechanism, and it's a mechanism that, at least to my knowledge, has not been used as we had envisioned in the legislatures several years ago.
Thank you. Representative Causer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to you gentlemen for your testimony. And Craig, you talked about the pilot project, so to speak, that you have in Potter County, and I really do believe that the rural electric co-ops are a great opportunity for us to expand in a rural area. How many people, or how many residents or people, does that one portion of your project propose to serve?
Representative, the pilot, we're targeting at about 1,200 residents. Also, that will be the beginning point where we will continue to expand off that network. We'll continue heading south, heading north. The pilot project will basically tie the Countersport substation, which is what we call Frank Lent, named after one of our very great board members, Frank Lent, who was, the situation, Representative. It's tragic. But our Frank Lent station, our Austin substation, and our Coneville substation. So those will be the members and consumers that will be picked up off the initial pilot. We will house a pilot right in Countersport. We hope to see it expand. Like I said, I'm very optimistic with CAF 2, although you never know what can come up in a federal auction. Let me say, I've been involved in auctions on the electric side in PJM, and those auctions are very complicated. I've never seen anything like this at the Federal Communications Commission. This is one of the most complicated auctions I've ever seen. So there's some gray area in there, so you never know what can pop up in front of you. But the goal would be to head south, head north, and then head east. We may be able to put pops in along the way to where we could actually provide service more quickly in eastern counties such as Bradford if the demand was there, which I do think it will be, but about 1,200 to 1,500 member customers.
And that's a tremendous opportunity, and as you said, to grow from there could be great for that rural area, and I know that people are excited about that project, so it's appreciated. To continue along that, the other line of thought, Mr. Matz talked about challenges with partnerships, particularly with the state, and that brought to mind, in a rural area, we've got a lot of state forest land, we've got a lot of DCNR infrastructure. As legislators, we've dealt with a lot of issues with technology with the state police, for example. And we all know about the issues with the state police radio system. And can one of you speak specifically to the challenges that you face with partnering with the state to use some of that infrastructure? Because I think that could also be, quite an opportunity.
A lot of it has to do with who do you approach at the state, and who actually has the authority to make those arrangements. The arrangement we were trying to make with the state police, it was 2 years of negotiating with the state police before they built their initial 800 system. We went to them with a project that was being funded by transportation through PennDOT, and it was when GIS were doing all the 911 data, and it was for moving large amounts of data. So we went to the state police to see if we could actually leverage some of their tower space. Initial thought was, no, see ya, have a nice day. We were persistent. We kept going back. We kept going back. We finally got to the right folks and talked to them. It took a year. They thought the project wasn't very good. There were some issues in it. But once we came to a general consensus that our project wasn't interfering with their project, and one of the caveats to the whole thing is we were building a tower. Could they use the tower? You bet. If you guys need it, you can use it. We'll sign off on that. Things changed at that point. When you're willing to work with them and allow them to work with you to achieve things, the conversation changed. When they got the ERA funds and rebuilt the upper northern part of the network, they were looking for providers to help offset some of that and get some of the key components in to meet the grant. We brought in 20 entities on our network that actually helped them with their grant. So it's just really, and you all know, it's the red tape. It's once you get through that red tape and get to know the people and get those agreements in place. When we use a tower site from the state police, it's very cookie cutter. It's always this piece of equipment. It's always this company. It's always the same things. So that's been very beneficial to us, and they've opened our network to a lot of things for us.
Well, one thing about rural PA is it's not cookie cutter. It's different in every area, so I think state government...
We keep our equipment cookie cutter.
No, I'm not criticizing you. I'm saying it's not cookie cutter in any particular area. The needs are different, and so I think the state government needs to adapt to that, to be able to work with you to provide service, provide that infrastructure in a certain area.
Our big who we provide service to is primarily gas companies and well sites. You go to a well site, they got 911 information all over. Call 911 if you hear anything. It's 45 minutes till I get somewhere to actually call 911, and I don't know where I was at. So now when we deploy these, you can actually you can make a phone call from there that there's an issue up there.
Thank you for that information. And Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that maybe this is an area that we could be helpful in pushing state government to be more cooperative in these kind of partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Euchre.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Question about the Bradford County Open Access Network. You said that it was roughly going to be about $10 million. Where is that funding coming from? Is that a county investment? And I will say, I think that's a fantastic idea of a local community identifying a potential solution, but just wondering, to fund this, how is it being paid for?
The first phase, actually the engineering piece, which was the critical component, as was said, that every area is different, so you have to, it really comes down to the brass tacks to really look at every pole and all that. Initially, that came from the county, that came through Act 13 funds. Next step is we are applying for different funding sources. We're also looking at some borrowing, too. We've got a pro forma that we believe in the last piece here, when we get the PUC information comes back, that will help with that. But obviously, it can't all be done either locally or by private providers. So there's also been interest in, to tell you the truth, if we can build a proper pro forma with some private equity. So we're looking at every aspect of it that we can, but again, it's being done in 3 loops so that we have a model. Number 1, we do the first piece, and then we move on from there. And we actually I have a conceptual plan here I could show you where we're at with it if you'd like copies of it. But we don't have all the money put together yet, but we feel confident that our project is probably the highest and best use and low cost. We also have providers that have stepped up and said, yeah, we'd love to be able to be the last mile piece.
And not necessarily a question, but more a comment in building on what Senator Scarnati mentioned about P3 partnerships. And you had mentioned about, equating this to like water and sewer infrastructure. I do wonder if there is a model out there like Penvest funding where, a community could go to state government looking for a loan or something along those lines. So I guess I issue that challenge as you all deal with this every day. Do you see a model out there that maybe exists in Pennsylvania to another utility or exists in another state that you could then bring back to the General Assembly and say, here's a potential solution? So don't even necessarily need a response to that, but just a suggestion. I mean, frankly, for me, I'm learning about dark fiber, last mile, first mile. This is all fairly new to me, but just for you all who live it every day, is there a model out there in state government or in other states that might potentially work? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Brame.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the Bradford County project, you're doing 3 loops throughout the county, and I guess your idea is that that's going to be open access to last mile vendors. Is that going to be a lease situation, or?
Yeah, there'll be the ability to tie in. We won't allow anyone not to be part of the network. Yes, there'll be. First thing is that's truly redundant, meaning that it's going to be fed from 2 different sources. When I use the term self-healing, that means if a portion of the fiber goes down, it can be backfed, much like electrical systems in the world. And we would build a pro forma that shows how we would maintain it. It wouldn't be a for-profit entity. It would be an entity that just to maintain it, and we'd subcontract for the improvements to it. But we would not be a quote provider. We're just going to be maintaining the network loop. This exists in a lot of places throughout the United States. I believe the rural electric cooperatives out in New Mexico, I think there was a fine example of that. Southern Tier, New York has one. It's not truly redundant. It's more educationally oriented. I think the issue really boils down to making sure that it's not one just sole source fiber, so to speak, that has one use. It needs to have a lot of different uses. Actually, public safety runs at the front of that.
Thank you. Full disclosure, obviously, I work for the Rural Electric Cooperative, so I love hearing all about the cooperative stuff going on, Mr. Ecker. But one thing in this panel that I really, really like that I heard, in rural Pennsylvania, we have a long, long history of working together to try to fix issues. That's exactly what an electric cooperative is. And it's nice to see that that's what's happening here. So the extent that the Commonwealth can be a partner in that, Mr. Matz, you were talking about that. I think that's a really, really potentially positive development and solution moving forward for this issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Matz, you mentioned about Virginia doing a study on tower sites that they had available, just so that there was an inventory, you knew who to talk to and that type of thing?
That's correct. They do have a website for it. I can forward it off to whoever would like to have that. And it's I was pleasantly surprised with how good it really was.
Could you talk to Barry Dank, our executive director, and I mean, that's the type of thing that the Center for Rural Pennsylvania may be able to really look into and to provide a study or something that would be really useful to people, especially in rural Pennsylvania.
After seeing what they did, I think it would be very beneficial, because sometimes it's hard to find out who actually owns the tower site. Or you go to the FCC and that tower site's been sold 2 or 3 times and it's not up to date, and you're calling around trying to figure out who to speak to. Sometimes that's part of the battle, just who do you need to talk to.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. At this point, we're going to take about a 10-minute break. Vice President and CIO from UPMC Susquehanna, and we also have Dr. Robert Giglio, the Medical Director for Population Health and Clinical Innovations from J.C. Blair Memorial Health System. If you want to chat, please, you're welcome to do it, but please go into the next room. Thank you. Whoever. You got the short straw?
There we go.
Thank you.
Chairman Yaw and board members, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today with respect to broadband availability, accessibility, and affordability in healthcare. I started my career in health information technology at Susquehanna Health in 1997. My degree's in industrial engineering from Penn State, where prior to serving in IT, I worked in both manufacturing and healthcare as a Lean Six Sigma engineer. I was fortunate enough to move into IT at the advent of information technology in healthcare. In the early 1990s, healthcare IT was, for the most part, data processing and data entry. It dealt mostly with billing of insurance companies and the consumer for services that were provided. During this time, the healthcare or healthcare industry was in quality crisis. The industry was slow to realize that clinical care should be supported by systems that are carefully and consciously designed to promote safe, effective, patient-centered, timely, and efficient care. The industry eventually realized that information technology plays a critical role in the support of and the design of those systems. At Susquehanna Health, this meant that our need for trained IT professionals grew exponentially. Our IT department grew from a staff of 10 to its current total of 75 to support the growing needs of IT needs of our organization and the patients and region we serve. We transitioned from basic data processing to developing and supporting complex systems such as electronic medical records in physician offices, computerized physician order entry versus handwritten orders, and viewing images on computers called PACS rather than on viewing stations with actual film. The industry changed, and we were able to evolve to support the change. As an industry, healthcare is moving from actual in-person visits to virtual telemedicine visits with physicians from across the state, nation, and world. If we look at other states, in order to provide a better understanding of where telemedicine might progress in Pennsylvania, in California, over 50% of last year's patient visits at Kaiser Permanente were conducted online by virtual visits or through the health systems applications. Over 50%. All of this technology requires additional bandwidth to support these connection points. In its most basic definition, bandwidth describes the level of traffic and amount of data that can transfer between users through a network. For example, bandwidth is the number of tables in a restaurant, and the network traffic is the number of diners. The more tables in the restaurant, the more people can dine at the same time. The higher the bandwidth, the more users can be connected to systems and fully utilize these systems in an efficient manner. With all this change in healthcare and other industries came the need for broadband. The term broadband came to mean the capacity to transfer large amounts of data quickly over a connection. Let me give you some examples of these greater bandwidth or broadband needs. In 1997, we were installing 56K circuits to support our physician offices. In 2018, the same connectivity is reaching 100 megabytes, almost 2,000 times greater the connection speed. In 1997, our hospitals were being supported by 100 megabyte connections. These same connections are now 1 to 10 gigabytes, or 100 times greater the bandwidth. While this broadband connectivity is more established and plentiful in our system's southern region, in locations like Williamsport, and even Lock Haven and Sunbury, thanks to our regional telecommunication companies, this is not the case in the northern tier of Pennsylvania. Locations such as Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hospital, right here in Wellsboro, and Culm Memorial Hospital in Countersport, and the surrounding provider offices in this region do not have the telecommunication companies or infrastructure to support the advanced healthcare technology needs to which I'm referring. In these underserved regions, the return on investment is not incentivized enough for the telecommunication companies. The locations are too remote, the terrain is too difficult, and the distance too far from a population center to make it feasible and economical. The result, partnerships between telecommunication providers are formed, which increases the cost, complexity, and support of the broadband connection. In these cases, the reliability of the network also comes into question, and the cost of redundant connections becomes almost impossible to financially support. The only thing that has saved our organization and these healthcare locations in the northern tier from extreme costs, which greatly limit the quality of healthcare and technology that we can deliver in this region, is the grant funding we have been able to realize through organizations like the Rural Healthcare Program. The RHC program supports healthcare facilities in bringing world-class medical care to rural areas through increased connectivity, providing up to $400 million annually in reduced rates for broadband and telecommunication services. Susquehanna Health, now UPMC Susquehanna, has had the opportunity to receive funding from this program through two different funding agencies, the Pennsylvania Mountains Healthcare Alliance and SpectraTel. Both of these agencies have been invaluable to our connectivity success in this region. However, the ability to receive funding is becoming more difficult as the demand for funding due to increased needs and additional facilities has limited the ability to participate in these grant opportunities. The dollars available are being spread thinner and putting stress on the funding stream. Without this funding, deploying the best and effective technology could be compromised for this northern region of healthcare. The broadband needs in healthcare will only increase. The technology innovations of 10 years in the future will make today's technology look simple and antiquated. A 100 megabyte or even 10 gigabyte connection may seem small compared to the future technology need and innovation, such as artificial intelligence and machine learning in healthcare. Our mission at UPMC Susquehanna is to extend God's healing love by providing outstanding care today and shaping tomorrow's healthcare through clinical and technological innovation and education. In part, this can only be achieved, especially in our northern tier at locations such as Soldiers and Sailors and Cole Memorial and the surrounding provider offices through proper and economical broadband support. Thank you.
Thank you. Doctor?
Distinguished panel and guests, it's a real privilege to talk to you. I'm not an expert at broadband. I'm an expert at the use, the end case use thereof, so I'm not a technologist. I'd like to just tell you almost on a story basis of the last 9 months and just kind of bring it around to what would I ask for or suggest, kind of, and if you bear with me. In the printed testimony, which I'll try to avoid reading, I just gave a visual example of I got a phone call being recruited to come move from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I'm a city kid. I'm from Chicago. I trained at the Mayo Clinic, and I keep moving to smaller and smaller towns. I think, so from Mayo Clinic down to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I spent the last 25 years practicing pulmonary and critical care medicine, basically treating preventable or chronic disease in intensive care units and disease related to poor behavior and traumatic illness. But in the process there, I also accidentally got involved in disaster response with some of the technologies I've developed on a commercial side. We ended up doing work at 9/11 in New York. We ended up doing work, working with the White House, with Governor Ridge, and then with Hurricane Katrina. And I've been fortunate enough to be involved with chronic care in ordinary times and acute care in extraordinary times. And I get a call, could I come to J.C. Blair Hospital? I didn't even know where it was. Somewhere along the Juanita River, as the recruiter said to me, not the Juniata River, all right? As I realized that my in-laws live in State College, I've been driving past the Lewistown or Lewisburg, one of those exits, over the years, and it's this little valley near a place called Raystown Lake, which was built to provide electricity, in part to my area, when folks didn't have it, by the co-op and by the federal government with state support. My job there at J.C. Blair was to be the director of population health and clinical innovations. And most of you are saying, I don't know what that is, population health. I know what public health is. It's like treating syphilis or tuberculosis or poor people. Population health is how do we make everyone healthier or keep them healthy or return them to health, every single citizen, not just the ones like Mr. Vintella was referring to with an extraordinary need. But how do we prevent and delay chronic disease so that we have less heart attacks, less strokes, and less cost? And why would we want to care about that? Deputy Secretary Lauren Hughes, who some of you know from the Department of Health, has been working with our hospital to create a new model for economic payment, where instead of nearly going broke and begging for someone to acquire us, part of what they're looking at is, what if we got paid in advance with a guaranteed payment? And not paid on what care we provided, but on what outcomes we achieved. Very different. Not getting paid for someone having a heart attack, then a complication where they need to be intubated, then they need a complication, they're on the ventilator, then they pop the lung, then they need a chest tube. We'd make a fortune. Could we make a model that says if that person never shows up with a heart attack, could the hospital be more sustainable? That's my job. My job is to figure out the economics of that, making that happen, and how do I engage the community to help make that happen. So I just have this graphic that's in the handout, but it's kind of a person within a series of circles for those that don't see it. But it refers to something called the socio-ecologic model, which says, how do you support a person's health and well-being? You support them by taking care of their social determinants of health and putting them in an ecosystem to support it. Social determinants are what determines you're going to be healthy when you're, let's say, when you're 60. Your chance of being alive at 60 are impaired by tobacco, but they're also impaired if you have a crappy education, don't finish high school. You're at the same risk of being dead at age 60 if you don't have a high school diploma or GED. So when you're looking at broadband and you're looking at health, you're asking me to testify about health, when the other gentlemen are talking about education, pay attention. It's just as important as getting 30% of my population to quit smoking as to get the 28% of the dropouts to graduate. Unemployment is a social determinant of health. Housing is a social determinant. Access to high-quality care is also. So let's talk about high-quality care and how we access it and how we support health care in a rural community. You know, we're surrounding that person with peers, family and friends is the biggest influencer, community organizations, then community infrastructure, and then policy. I'd like to talk to you briefly about community infrastructure and policy in a sense. In the community, what we've done is we've created a Force for Health movement where we're encouraging people to be a force for health for themselves and others. They're all doing a health risk assessment. They're getting an education prescription, exercise prescription, and being referred for case management. That case management is limited. We have 200 patients that are costing us, we have 200 patients in the county. This is a small county, 46,000. It's large by some standards, I realize now, listening to you guys. But we have 46,000 people being served by a 22-bed hospital. Our analysis of what it's costing us as we look at our healthcare costs and look at actual preventable costs, if we can impact the overutilization of the emergency room, extra admissions, and certain complications, we estimate with Secretary Hughes' team analyzing our data and data from certain of the insurance providers, about a $5 million a year savings by cutting our admissions in half on 200 people. We can identify which super utilizers that live mostly in Mount Union, in intense rural areas, and some near Huntington and some in Huntington, but our super utilizers are costing us $5 million. They're costing us more than that, but we think we could save $5 million if we had a high-quality care management system. And what does that mean? You guys are talking about the long haul and the middle mile and the last mile. I care about the last inch. I have to care for people in those seconds or minutes of their life that are most critical, or in those periods of time where they're saying, should I drive to the hospital? Should I call the doctor? Should I call the nurse? Should I call my mother-in-law? Or maybe, could I tap the phone and talk to the ER triage nurse? And she says, you don't need the stitches, put a Band-Aid on it. Or she says, we'll send an ambulance, or we'll send a helicopter. Those types of things, we don't care how we get the information. We are still doing house calls for that last inch care. We're using the telephone extensively. Sometimes we're lucky enough to use a cellular telephone, sometimes with broadband. But we're interested in care from the patient at home to that phone call to that nurse. We're putting in place a community paramedicine program when someone goes home from the hospital with Wi-Fi, with a MiFi on the roof, so to speak, to care for them when they go home from the hospital. We care about that remote healthcare worker, that community health worker or community paramedicine connecting to the physician's officer to the ER for protocol help. When our hospital can't handle it, and if you come visit Huntington County and come explore Raystown Lake like 1.5 million people do, please come. But do not have a stroke on Thursday unless it's the third Thursday of the month, the only time we have a neurologist in town. Okay? So we need high-quality protocols like Tim was talking to me about at UPMC Susquehanna to help handle that. We can't recruit a neurologist, cardiologist, urologist, exologist. I'm the first pulmonologist that has ever lived in Huntington County, and they're amazed I'm buying a house downtown. And if I'm going to live there, I'm going to be part of that community, and we're going to make some changes. So as I look at that community, and I look at our downtown, which is empty, and I look at our opioid deaths, which are tragic. Every high school kid this year in every high school knows someone who died as a classmate. Half of our churches have had someone who has died. It's a horrible problem. I know this community is well versed in it. You cannot think about dealing with opioids in isolation if you don't think about broadband health care. As you're supporting someone giving Narcan in the field, and someone wakes up for 10, 15 minutes and then goes back under, and they're still isolated. Let's move on from that. Case study, congestive heart failure, or COPD, costs a fortune if someone is readmitted. I know this is not the health committee, but you guys, just for those that don't understand it, if you are readmitted after 30 days of discharge, before 30 days of discharge, it's assumed that the hospital did a crappy job, kicked you out too soon, without enough support. So you show up at the ER in congestive heart failure, near death, you're readmitted. The hospital eats that cost. If you need an ICU or a cardiac cath, it's easily $50,000. That's not money that's going to some bonuses for high-paid people in Huntington, trust me. That's money like we're shutting down our obstetrics, maybe, or we're looking at the challenges. It's cost us $1.5 million to keep obstetrics in our community. So we're looking at ways of how can we help that pregnant mom make the critical decisions, maybe if we don't have obstetrics. I know this is being broadcast. I'm not saying we're ending obstetrics in Huntington County. I'm saying it's one of the things we're challenged to keep going, along with other services. But that case study, when I send someone home with congestive heart failure, an ideal scenario that I can do with off-the-shelf technology that half of us have the technology skill set to pull together, is I can send someone with a pulse oximeter that's measuring their oxygen and their pulse frequency, a little Band-Aid that's measuring their electrocardiogram, or a set of sheets on their bed that turns their bed into an ICU. Call it a robot or just call it an iPad sitting there that they can talk to and communicate with the nurse. If you have the Bluetooth-enabled device, like the Bluetooth on your phone for your speakers, any medical device you can think of, from a ventilator to an IV pump to that cardiac monitor I mentioned, talks to the phone with enough bandwidth can do with pictures and data back to me or the nurse on call at 3 in the morning. No one should go home from my hospital without that kind of care if they need it. And it lets me get them home earlier from the hospital. Our 3 nursing homes are asking me to put this together for COPD and for heart failure. So that brings me to a kind of a new calculus, is kind of what I want to get around to. We're all talking about the economic modeling here. It's crap. It just doesn't work. And I'm not going to testify again that it doesn't work because it's so damn obvious it doesn't work. We moved to Huntington. I rented a house initially 2 miles from the hospital. It happens to be on Alexandria Pike. Look at the map. It's between the prison and the Comcast office where they have their big line that comes in. I can't get Comcast at my house 3 miles. I'm 2 miles from the hospital. I'm in charge of telemedicine. I want to log in at home and help. I got to drive to the damn hospital to log in to help my patient with telemedicine. On a snowy day, I'm the problem, not them. I called Comcast. I'm a $200 a month subscriber in Lancaster. I said, I'm moving. They said, oh, I'm sorry. Where you live, we don't serve your 26 neighbors, but I tell you what, for $100,000, we will, and because you're a longtime subscriber, and if you help us recruit 20 of your neighbors, we'll give you each a $1,700 credit, so it only costs about $60,000 to get into your neighborhood. So I said, So I went, my only other choice of anything fast enough was Verizon, and it was wonderful, this MiFi device. High speed, 4G, LTE, until the second day of the month. Unlimited. It goes, once I hit 15 gigabytes, it guarantees me speeds of what's called up to 600 kilobytes. And I get confused with a kilobyte versus a megabyte versus a gigabyte. But it's a millionth of the bandwidth that these other gentlemen are talking about. It means my wife, who teaches at HEC, gainfully employed online, can't work from home. She drives the sheets to have classes with her professors or sits in my office at the hospital. You follow? We can't have commerce. No one wants to move into our empty downtown. So I guess what I'm saying is, what if? What if you did economic modeling think about this in a little different way? And what if we did a demonstration project and somebody in this room helped me make it happen? Well, what if we took Huntington County and I said, I'll give you some of that $50,000 I just saved. I'll pay for 20 poles. It's to that person's house. What if we made a collaborative, a Force for Health community collaborative, like an electrification co-op that kind of deals with things like tying into the Kinber network, KANBER.org. If you don't know what it is, you should, because I'm learning a lot. I was watching them build it over the last 10 years after my work at 9/11. It is a figure 8 on that map that goes through Pittsburgh and up to it goes everywhere except around the border of Huntington County as if someone said, please don't enter. It's in Mill Creek and Mount Union, and it goes around to the Altoona side. From Mill Creek and Mount Union, there's dark fiber running along the Norfolk Southern lines, Amtrak. It goes right through our downtown along one of the right-of-ways. Can we pop a tower in Mount Union and Wi-Fi, light up the whole city, light up Huntington, the whole city? I don't have to charge. I'll save it on healthcare costs. I'm going to get paid $4 or $5 million a month to provide healthcare for the community, whether no one shows up or everyone has a heart attack and a stroke. If I can provide higher quality last inch service in a demonstration model in Huntington County, I think we can scale it. I've talked to Kinber, they're interested. I've talked to my Penn Electric Co-op, they're skittish, but they want to sell me rights to be on their poles. And they might consider a joint venture. But their core business is renting space on their poles right now. That's what they have the management to handle. I've talked to the Affinity Network, which has a loop of 20 hospitals in rural Pennsylvania, but they're across the country. They want to sit down and have a next meeting. Can we do a demonstration project for Huntington County with a different economic modeling, looking at cost of healthcare savings? I want to light up downtown and have gigabyte speeds, and so when someone locates downtown and they sell their building and there's an increase in real estate value, I want some of that money to go back because the property values went up in our town because of the internet. I want to grab a piece of sales or revenue of anyone that uses the internet service in our town. Lawyers get a share of their findings or their savings or their, what's the right word, contingencies? Why not do that with broadband? If I'm setting up a business, I'll give a % of my revenue if it lets me do high speed from my town. When we live in Huntington, it's like going back decades. And you go up the road to State College and it's like Disney World. And in the difference of 26 miles, I want to recruit all those postdocs that are creating companies to come downtown Huntington and for pennies on the dollar, locate their business there, locate their jobs there. I want to start an internet company in Huntington, potentially, with this collaborative. The other thing I want you to seriously consider, this is slightly related, is the same concept of a dedicated rural health telemedicine service. If you look at all the rural places that the Kinber fiber goes, and I've talked to them about this, and to Secretary Hughes, Deputy Secretary Hughes, they're not endorsing this. They'd like me to explore it. But if we can tap into Kinber, which has lines, it has dark fiber, it still wants to rent, and we start with those selective, last-inch, very expensive patients as the first ones we electrify, so to speak, in the neighborhood, and then, God willing, from there, we tie into their neighbors later. We have a nice priority and a financial way to do it, and we're creating that next, leveraging an infrastructure that well over $100 million has already been spent on, is being underutilized under our feet. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a comment, and it's really interesting. Doctor, I don't know whether you know, but the Center of Rural Pennsylvania has done an extensive amount of public hearings and reports on the opioid heroin problem. I never thought about the fact that it was somehow could be intertwined with broadband.
Oh my. You know, we have an integrated behavioral health program. We're doing mental health counseling with patients that are suffering from these addictions. So it gives them the access to their counselors while they're in use, while they're in recovery, while after discharge. For mental health access just on a day-to-day basis. For the emergency support and is another. We are also with the University of Pittsburgh Center of School of Pharmacy with their opioid-free PA program. We have just shot with this Force for Health group out of one of our projects we're doing is a whole video education program for teenagers and young adults with a woman named Ashley Potts, who I believe, has testified at least.
We know her.
Good.
Yeah.
So Ashley, we're building an education piece for Ashley with our Force for Health program in Juniata College. So but to deliver that, we need the broadband or wireless access for kids or others to access those education pieces. It's intimately tied. If I can make one other comment, and I promise, I know I'm long-winded, especially the later speakers. From a policy standpoint, you guys don't have money as a group, but you influence others, and you have access to it. And I'm not asking necessarily for money, but I'm throwing out the seed there of help us find the right partners to enable us with that last inch. But from a policy standpoint, something that's naive, but it was suggested to me by, it doesn't matter, as Verizon looks at making money on 5G, you see a lot that they're investing in it and all that. Why not just simply require them to wire these X towers first? These towers in Huntington or whatever other counties first before they go after the higher density. Start with the lower density. Let them finance for those first couple years of loss because they're making an absolute fortune on the higher density clients and neighborhoods. That's a thought from a policy standpoint. Start there. Start in the lowest need areas first. Before you take something that's good and make it great, take something that doesn't exist or is crappy and make it great. I was involved in a project in Tanzania. That's what they chose to do. Why can't we?
I really appreciate your comments, and the Center for Rural Pennsylvania is bipartisan and it's bicameral. And the way that I look at our mission, and we have tried to protect it, is we look at issues and we want people to tell us what the problems are out there. If we don't know, and then that's our goal, is to gather information and say, here's what the problems are, and to act as a source for the legislature. Because we have several elected officials here, but then there are also people from Penn State and the Rural Electric Association and the Farm Bureau. So we have an eclectic group, I guess, for it. But our idea is to gather information and say, here it is. Now, we provide the information, and hopefully the legislature, some of us will pick up on some of these points and say, this is something that we can look into. But we look at it as like people need to tell us. And that's the goal that the Center for Rural Pennsylvania does.
Well, thank you for listening. Really.
Well, believe me, we listen, and some of the things that we said is we've done extensive work, which I thank the Center for Rural Pennsylvania Board on the heroin opioid problem. We probably have been the agency that has been the most consistent. We started 4 years ago, and to bring it to everybody now is an expert on opioids and heroin. So, but that's okay. That was the goal was to raise the awareness, and we looked at the broadband when this came up kind of in the same way. If we have to do this to raise the awareness, because there's so many people don't know, don't understand, and from people like that have been in these panels, it's very enlightening, frankly.
We feel like we're stuck in the 1950s with 2018 costs, 2008 reimbursements, and 2030 expectations. And so it's it's interesting to hear across the whole spectrum of the community, and everything that everyone's talking about across the community affects health. Okay, from transportation to access to economics to education.
Well, thank you. Thank both of you.
Thank you very much.
The next panel is Terry Dennison, the Executive Director of PA Route 6 Alliance, Lori Kopp, the Executive Director of Visit Potter Tioga, and Ed Sismanik, the owner of Susquehannock Lodge. I'm still saying good morning, but we're running close to the end of that.
Thank you to the Center for Rural PA, the board, for inviting us and letting us talk a little bit about broadband's impact on the tourism industry, on our communities, our small communities, and tourism-based businesses. The Pennsylvania Route 6 Alliance is the managing entity for the Pennsylvania Route 6 Heritage Corridor. We're one of the state heritage areas. And we have a management action plan that guides us in what we do. That plan was put together by input from many people and many different influences across the corridor. We are responsible for implementing that plan, for branding and marketing Route 6, for community development programs, and for planning efforts along the corridor. So we represent 11 counties, 9 convention and visitor bureaus, 4 other heritage areas, local development districts, local business districts, local business owners, chambers of commerce, so there's quite an influence on the work we do. Our goal is to preserve and enhance and promote the treasured resources that contribute to a shared sense of place, and through that we come up with different heritage tourism strategies. We have 6 main goals that we work on, and I'm going to address 2 of them: tourism promotion and economic development. Broadband accessibility, as I said, has been one of our concerns since we became a heritage area in 2005. We're not just a heritage area, we're also a destination marketing organization, which means that we really get into marketing the 11 counties across the northern tier. And we have the challenge that we're competing, obviously, with other destinations in Pennsylvania that have much larger promotional budgets than we have. So social media has become one of the easiest ways and has to promote an area, and it's actually helped us somewhat level the playing field. But without broadband access, without good internet access, use of social media and the use of a lot of our promotional is impossible. Facebook and Instagram are now the equivalent to word-of-mouth advertising, and it is crucial that small DMOs be able to monitor what is being said by them as well as promote their events and attraction. The use of video and instant live feeds through social media is gaining in popularity, requiring more bandwidth for uploading. For example, we just did a live feed on Facebook last Friday from a small business in Meadville where we unveiled our traveling artisan exhibit. We did not have any reporters show up, which was very sad. But I found that an Erie television channel took our live feed, edited it down into a 30-second spot, and aired it on their news both that night and the next morning. That is something we could not have been able to afford to have done. But the fact that we had a live feed using the place that we were at's Wi-Fi helped us get that type of promotion that we wouldn't have had otherwise. So one of the things that we're going to talk about is what are the visitors' expectations? When visitors come to our area, what do they expect? And most of them now expect to have both reliable cell service, or to be able to have their own hotspot, to have Wi-Fi at the businesses, to have good internet access at the businesses they are at. It's not a blessing as we have become a culture of people staring at our phones and tablets. That's unfortunate. But there is a need for communities to offer those services so they are competitive in attracting new visitors, new residents, and new businesses. Another challenge that we face in rural Pennsylvania is wayfinding and navigation. And I don't know if this can be solved through broadband, more accessibility to broadband, or better cell coverage, but somehow we need to have a better wayfinding system, and GPS programs seem to help a lot in those areas. We are all hoping for improvements also in that area. Most of our DMOs and our CVBs use geo-coordinates for their members on their website, so that when somebody pulls up a website when they're traveling on their mobile phone or their tablet, they are able to be navigated to that location, and that's very important. There are many advances in marketing that are happening because the public is demanding it, which means that they are relying more on electronic equipment in their daily operation and travel. Along US Route 6, many businesses and accommodations are still small, family-owned and operated establishments. Technology needs to be consistent, it needs to be easy to use, and it needs to be affordable. Their patrons and guests expect them to easily have access to additional information and reviews, be able to share their experiences through posts and contact with their family and friends, and paying by credit card. Businesses need to be able to promote themselves, to manage their inventories, and we're finding a lot of our lodging and accommodation places need to have some type of booking service that's immediate, so they need the technology to make sure they're keeping those up to date. So this all requires infrastructure that supports electronic transmissions and dependable internet access. I would like to share with you a comment from an owner of a popular retail attraction along Route 6 in Potter County. He said, "As an owner-operator of a retail store, I can tell you that consistent broadband service is extremely important. I use an iPad point-of-sale system which tracks inventory and runs card processing over the internet. Both require consistent communication back and forth in order to operate properly. The only choice I have for broadband are the satellite providers, which I have tried both, and they do not meet our needs. And Verizon 4G LTE data from a cell phone, and that wasn't an option until Verizon switched to an unlimited data plan, which at the time that he wrote this, it was not working properly. In addition to daily operations, we have customers who would like to be able to utilize a Wi-Fi connection while they pass through the area. I have had several over the past year stop because their GPS drops out and they cannot connect to their navigation. I help them out the best I can, but again, a broadband option would be extremely beneficial to not only to me, but to all of my customers." And that was from Keith Chase from the Black Forest Trading Post. So most of our small business owners are relying on point-of-sale systems that require constant, reliable service. The strength of our artisan trail is helping artists stay in the area that they love, in the rural setting that they love, and making a living. This requires that they be able to sell their masterpieces in their studio and their galleries with a good point of POS system, and also through e-commerce sites like Etsy. So I don't know the answer if we need broadband everywhere. To me, it seems that it's important to get into our communities. I was visiting several of our Route 6 communities this week, and I have two very different stories to tell you. The first one is the town of Youngsville in Warren County. They were asking for any help we can give them in getting broadband accessibility. They have a small TV company right there who is providing internet right now. They just experienced the loss of 30 jobs. They had a business that wanted to move to Youngsville, take over a building, bring 30 jobs there, but because they could not provide the type of high-quality internet access, the business went somewhere else. The other one I want to tell you about is Kane, Pennsylvania, McKean County, who Representative Kauser is familiar with. They are doing fantastic. They have a lot of new businesses coming into the area. Their storefronts are filling up. They have a young population, around 30 years old, buying new businesses, starting new businesses there. And speaking to some of them, they say it's because they have a fantastic internet system in the town of Kane, right in the town of Kane, not on the outside, right in the town of Kane. And they are able to do the business that they need to do. There are several young people moving back who are telecommuting and working for larger companies elsewhere, but being able to work from home. We are really seeing a renaissance in the Kane area, and that's a large part of it. So I just want to leave you with those examples. Thank you.
Good morning, senators, legislators, board members. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm Lori Kopp. I'm the executive director of Visit Potter Tioga. In July of 2017, we went from being a single county visitors bureau to a two-county visitors bureau, taking in Potter County with us. And as you can imagine, with our two rural counties, the issue of broadband is an important one, not only for our visitors, but also for our businesses. We represent about 200 businesses across the two counties who are spread throughout the district. They have their own challenges. Everyone talks about pretty much the same thing. As we have visitors who come into the area, most of them are coming from much more urban areas. We market out to Toronto, New York, parts of New Jersey, down into the DC metro area, as far out as Cleveland and all over the state of Pennsylvania. So as you can imagine, when they come into our area, their expectation level is a lot different from the residents here in the area. They're used to having unlimited service, being able to use their phone for everything. In our visitor center, which is just outside of Wellsboro here, we'll see multi-generational families who come in, and each of them, the first thing they do is ask us, do you have Wi-Fi access, which we do offer to all of our visitors. So you might find grandmother who's got to check her emails. You might find mom, she's going to be posting what's going on Facebook. The kids are Snapchatting, talking about, oh my gosh, I'm not sure if I'm going to survive this vacation with my parents. But you know, everybody has their own expectations and needs. In the world that we live in, everyone wants to be connected 24/7. So that is a bit of a challenge for us. The other issue we have is, because we are a very rural destination, the people who are coming here are coming to experience the outdoors, but they don't necessarily understand that when you're in the outdoors, there's not necessarily a cell tower right over top of you, so you can be doing everything that you want to do on your phone. There is there is a visitor who likes to come just to experience the outdoors, but then there are the other 99% who expect to have the experience, but yet still have the connection. One of the issues too is safety concerns for places like the rail trail, the 62-mile trail just outside of Wellsboro. There's little, if any, connectivity there. So families who are traveling with their children are concerned, and that is a question we get very frequently, is what happens if something happens? I think that was addressed by the doctor who was here a little bit too. I mean, we live in an area where minutes could mean the difference of whether you're going to survive or not. And if someone were on the rail trail and had a heart attack at the bottom of Leonard Harrison State Park, it's gonna be a challenge, first of all, to find out, second of all, to get them out of there. So that is a big concern. From our standpoint, as the marketing entity for the area, we have to market on the level of the people who are our target market. So we're asked to do a lot of online advertising. We are looking at different ways and tools for people to use when they come into the area. One of the projects we had looked at was utilizing augmented and virtual reality to create a tour guide for people coming into the area. The hardest part of that and the most challenging was the inability to access broadband on a regular basis. So we weren't able to continue with that project. So that's one of the things we're looking at towards the future. And you'll see if you look at larger, more urban areas, that's a pretty standard thing now. Everybody's moving towards the augmented and the virtual reality. One of our catch-22, though, with all of this is, so how do we solve this problem? Do we put a cell tower on every mountaintop? And no, that's not realistic. The people who come here to enjoy the natural beauty. We don't want to destroy our view sheds by having, utility poles and cell towers in every 5-foot space. So I think that's a big challenge for all of us. The other side of it is looking at our parks. We have about 10 state parks in our area where those are our major attractions. In a place like Cherry Springs, where they're seeing about 65,000 people a year who come in just for the stargazing, one of the biggest problems is, or challenges I should say, is that when they're arriving, they're coming in for a night program. And again, we're looking at our target audiences who are in more urban areas. So they may have an impression that you get to Cherry Springs State Park, you go to a stargazing program, and then they check into the Holiday Inn, which is right next door, which we know is not the reality of the situation. So we find a lot of people who are basically kind of stuck out in the woods without access to information, and that can be bad. When they find that they're 25 to 30 miles from the nearest town, there can be a little bit of panic that ensues. And it's hard for people on the resident side. I think it's one challenge versus the visitor side. Where I live here in Wellsboro, I do have broadband access from my home. I could work from home. I can do whatever I need to do from home or from my office. But that's not the case in a lot of areas around this county and also Potter County. And I think on the economic side, it is so important that we are able to guarantee that as we look at the future with more entrepreneurs coming on board, more people who are working from home. It limits us on an economic side if we cannot provide that service on a regular basis. So in my conclusion, I'd just like to say that the challenge is we live in a technological world, but we also have to balance it with the natural world that we live in physically. So if there is some way that we can come up with that solution working together, I think it's important that we have that conversation and continue it. I am very happy to hear what we've heard today. I have a greater understanding of the issues. I think from our side, we always hear, oh my gosh, you're so cut off, why is it? Well, there are reasons why, with talking about the issues on the polls, which I would have never dreamed could be a reason why we don't have broadband. I mean, those are the challenges we need to start to look at and to be able to sit at a table and talk about and figure out the solutions. So thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Ed Shemanek, and along with my wife, we run the Susquehannock Lodge, and we're located in Potter County on Route 6, just below the Lumber Museum and Ski Denton. We've been in business since 1988, and I guess in the last 15 years, we've seen a big upswing for wanting to be connected and have broadband service. And it's not only for our business, but for our clients. Our clients are expecting it when they get to our business. They're looking for it. They want to download music. They want to be connected. They want to talk to their kids back at home. So it's very important. I also do support work, IT support work for Route 6, Potter County Education Council, and the new rural college just started in Pennsylvania. And the college mostly depends on video for the classroom. And luckily, most of the sites that they have now has broadband. They're either using education sites or libraries, which connection's pretty good. But if we have some students that can't make it in that night and they're at home and they want to connect, it's a problem. You get a lot of pixelation and they can't view the screen, and it's not a very good experience. So I look forward to this initiative and getting a more reliable and faster broadband network. Thank you.
One comment, and I think that we're starting to see a pattern develop that how important broadband is across the board to everybody. And I'm not sure that I never thought about it before coming here today. So, you know, like I said, if the point of what we accomplish in having these hearings is to raise awareness, that's what we're doing. So thank you for telling us and sharing your stories and how important it is to everything that you do. So thank you.
Thank you.
The next panel of presenters is Dr. Brenda Freeman, the superintendent from Wellsboro Area School District, and Gerald Port, the owner of Port Farms.
Good morning. And I too am very humbled to be able to sit before you and talk to you about our rural regional area in the broadband and communication issues that we have in our area, especially as it relates to the school districts in our region. I'm fortunate enough to have served as superintendent in a Potter County School as well as the Tioga County School Districts. And my experiences have been with students, and we are challenged in today's education at preparing our students to be college and career ready. And what that means to us is we are very technology savvy in our school districts. We offer our students online programming. We have virtual reality experiences that we are already dedicated funds to. We have online opportunities and portals for our parents to be communicated and working hand in hand with us. But with those opportunities at school become challenges at home. We used to say in our world that we asked our students to power down as they came into our schools because the cell phone industry brought a new realm of technology into our schools that we were not prepared for. The reversal of this has come to light now in the sense that we are asking our students to power down when they go home. We offer opportunities, as I said, in our school, and I'll give you an example of one. Recently, I was able to visit a different school district looking at opportunities to explore to enhance our own educational opportunities. And I was speaking with an 11th grade student who put together a farm bot, a $250 kit, which created a robot for farming. And through that kit, he created a program that is getting such notoriety that he is going to actually present in Indonesia. So he took his virtual reality experience and he downloaded the city that he was visiting in Indonesia, and he walked the streets, and he entered the building in which he was going to present. So he has no barrier, or he's not inhibited by understanding what culture or what environment that he will be visiting, much like we could do here in Wellsboro. But what we lack is not every one of my students have internet access at home. I'm lucky and fortunate, as I said, we have 330 square miles in a Wellsboro area school district, and about 70% of my students have internet access. But that leaves those 30% who do not, and do not have those opportunities to take what they are learning in our school and apply it when they get home in the evening. Another turn on that is the safety issues. My buses do not have radio communication in many areas when they are delivering our students to and from school. So cell phone coverage and cell towers are non-existent in many of my areas for safety. Also, there's 19 school districts in IU-17 in which I am a member of, and we meet on a regular monthly basis, which takes me out of my district. Many of the territory that I travel, and including the area that I visit most often, does not have cell phone coverage, which takes me, the primary administrator, out of my district to learn important updates that we get from legislation with no coverage back to my home district in case of emergency. When we talk about our students, and I promise to be brief because I want you to meet Senator Yaw, your challenge of saying good morning to every one of your presenters. But when we look at the challenges that we have, and we say to our students, we are preparing you for the world in which you live, and you are our future to invent the things that are yet to come. But their homework at home inhibits them from being creative and doing that. We want every one of our students in Wellsboro School District that when they go home at night and mom and dad says, "What did you do in school today?" instead of the typical response, we want them to say, "Let me show you." And that can only be possible with allowing every one of my students to have access to internet at home. So thank you.
Yes, I'd like to thank all of you for allowing me to speak today. My name's Gerald Port. My wife and I own Port Farms. We're located up in Erie County, Pennsylvania, about 15 miles south of the city. I'm going to try to give you a little bit of picture of like an end user. We have a 250-acre farm that we produce soybeans, corn, that type of product, but we also do agritainment, pumpkin farm in the fall, choose and cut Christmas trees, and we also do weddings during summer. During the fall time, we have about 50,000 people that come visit us for our corn maze and such. And with that brings different things to our farm. Point of sale system that we have, we use a Square. Currently with our internet, we have 12 registers. 3 can only run on the type of internet that we have. So the rest of the registers, we either have to have cell service type iPads, so that's additional cost per month, or just an everyday register that you use. So the pipeline that we have to access internet is just so limited that it really restricts what we can do. Simply sending a file to your accountant from your QuickBooks file it can't be done. You're putting on a memory stick, you're driving a half hour, dropping off at the accountant's office. And one of the big things with us is social media, like some of the other businesses talked. Uploading pictures, just simple things, video, just becomes not necessarily impossible, but the length of time it takes is it just adds more and more time to your everyday tasks that really shouldn't be. And another big thing with farms, a lot of the offices are based at home. And then you couple a home office with children either in high school or college, and especially if they go away for college and come back, and then they're used to internet, and now we're competing. I'm trying to run a business type, and they're trying to do their simple tasks, either homework or just social stuff, becomes a challenge because the pipeline, once again, for the internet that we have is so limited. It just really restricts what we can do. And the other frustrating part is it's so close to us. It's within a couple miles. We can see it and almost taste it, and they just can't. We keep the same stories that I've heard here. It just doesn't make sense, or it's going to cost this, so they just can't get it to us. So those are the limiting factors that we have. Once again, I just appreciate you letting me speak today, and that's it.
Representative Everett.
No, I don't really have a question, just a comment that echoes what you've been saying. I just got an invitation to go to the breakfast at Blast sometime in May, and when I drive to Canton, and Senator Yaw drives throughout his district, and it's the same for all of us. We go communications out for periods of time, as I did when I drove from Lycoming County to Wellsboro yesterday. And fortunately, no emergencies, didn't need to do anything, but it happens. And the other thing that we do hear consistently from folks, like Mr. Port said, is that folks that do have supposedly high-speed internet via DSL, they'll say that, you know, during the day sometimes, if they're retired and they're home, things work great till everybody gets home from work and home from school. And then it's, you know, as our homes do, as we overload our homes, the whole network gets overloaded and nobody can do anything. And, you know, it is unfair to kids with education or folks that need it for their business. You know, if you live in town, you've got access to high-speed internet as much as you want to pay for. The kids that go home and try to do their homework or get on their iPads and do stuff, you know, they're not, and that's not fair. I mean, you know, everybody should have access. It's a, you know, we're repeating ourselves. It's become a necessity these days. And obviously, from the turnout today and the testimony that we're hearing, I think we've touched a nerve in rural Pennsylvania that we'll probably be following up on. And thank you, everybody, for coming and testifying today. We're learning a lot. It's very beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Euchre.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question, Dr. Freeman. How much of a disadvantage, and I know it's somewhat subjective, but is that 30% of your students that just simply can't turn in their homework electronically or complete, you know, teacher task? Like I said, I know it's subjective, but you know, I know my kids do a lot of homework online, and you know, they're learning technological skills for the next, you know, for the next century. What disadvantage does that 30% have?
Sure, absolutely. We try to create opportunities for them to come in before and after school. So that takes away from that family time. So I count that as a disadvantage as well. Or we try to keep our students active, and they're doing different things at night. So instead of being at home, they're going to a friend's home, or they're going to the library, or they're coming downtown to sit where they can access internet. So as far as numbers, you know, it is very subjective, but as far as the quality that enhances their lives after they leave, it's a huge disadvantage.
Mr. Brame.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for being here. Dr. Freeman, this is maybe a little different angle at this, but I wonder, as we're sitting here, we're hearing a lot about kids and their ability to learn. What about teachers and their ability to teach? How is this impacting something like recruitment and retention of teachers into the community?
That's a very good point. I do have several new hires that live in the Williamsport area and drive to Wellsboro because of that, because the housing market obviously as well. But you know, it is a disadvantage for the teachers who live here, because some of the teachers, they're spending time at school preparing their lessons and incorporating the digital technology into their classrooms. I also have an administrator who does not have cell phone coverage at home, and he has very limited internet use. So it hinders him as well if he's at home and he has to more or less be tied to his household when we need him. So it goes multiple ways, those that are here and those that choose to live not in our community, which is sad, because we have that's what community and schools are about, is the network of people living within your communities.
Interesting, Mr. Port. I know that one of the things that I'm on the Senate Ag Committee also, and one of the things I know that we've talked about extensively is agritourism, which is a big, that's a huge issue now, and I never thought about broadband being a problem for agritourism. So I'm getting the message here. It's all over the place.
It affects everything. I mean, everybody spoke here. I mean, it just hits every part of, it's like electricity. I mean, everybody needs it. And now broadband there's really no difference. I mean, you have to have it.
Yeah. Well, yes, sir.
Yeah, and just to dovetail on the farming thing, Senator Yaw and I are also on the Chesapeake Bay Commission, and we spend a lot of time with agriculture in Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. And some of the even larger farmers, I mean, their tractors are GPS driven, and they're telling the telemetry of how much fertilizer to put down in certain parts of their fields, and they need to be online, they're monitoring the commodities market and all kinds of things. And, you know, you just go, and they said, you know, we can't farm the way we want to farm and the way we need to farm in the modern world unless we have, you know, broadband capability. And you go, wow, you know, who knew that, you know,
Yeah, the
you know,
technology
the
is
perception
crazy.
of farmers is, you know, but that's not the way modern farming is, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the technology is changing so quick, and to be competitive, you have to keep up with the technology, because the margins are so small, especially for those big type of farms that are doing that type of farming. So you have to stay on top of that type of stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, done.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks to both of you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm not too far behind schedule today. The last presenter is Mark Smith, the Executive Director for Broadband Initiatives for Governor Wolf.
Well, thank you.
Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
I
appreciate the invitation.
understand that your wife is expecting, and there was a question as to whether or not you would be here.
I could leave at any moment.
No.
So. Just letting you know.
Well, you're here now, so.
Yes, yes, exactly. Cell phone service is important right now. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I know that the problem has been framed, I think, fairly well today, so I won't spend a lot of time doing that, but just a few opening comments, and I'll take some questions. So I will say that the governor believes that broadband access is essential to growing our economy, supporting our agricultural businesses, expanding educational opportunities for our children, increasing access to modern health care, and improving the safety of our communities. We also know that it's important to our economic well-being, as well as important as our rails, roads, bridges, ports, waterways, hospital, educational institutions. And the governor also believes that this warrants the utmost public sector investment and support. To meet that challenge and in taking this seriously, the governor a few weeks ago announced the Office of Broadband Initiatives to ensure that every Pennsylvanian has access to high-speed internet. This office is responsible for developing efforts to ensure that every Pennsylvanian has that access, that we're coordinating all of our state agencies, coordinating all of our resources, building the public and private partnerships necessary to increase broadband deployment, coordinating mapping projects and other state projects that are currently ongoing, and overall developing a program and programs that promote broadband deployment throughout the state. We've done a few things in getting started in this effort. The administration is working to effectively market and lease state assets to service providers willing to expand access in rural areas, with the added benefit of generating revenue for the state. We have inventoried and geolocated every single building, tower, bridge, and usable structure that may be of benefit. We're currently in the process of working through an RFP that was put out by the Department of General Services last year to help us market those assets. As you probably already heard today, in 2015, Verizon declined $139.6 million in FCC funds that could have come to Pennsylvania. We have initiated an effort to recapture as much of that declined funding as possible, and this is called the Broadband Investment Incentive Program. The program is offering financial incentives to private providers that are interested in bidding on census blocks within Pennsylvania. The funding is coming from PennDOT to fulfill its strategic goal of building network along roadways, right-of-ways, intersections, and furthering its connections across its network. This is certainly a good opportunity since the auction is taking place now to attract investment in Pennsylvania, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. Furthermore, this is certainly the first program, but not the only program that will have to take place to increase broadband deployment. The auction represents about 84,500 households and businesses for service. But across Pennsylvania, we estimate there are over 500,000 housing units and businesses that still lack adequate access. So we're working right now on future efforts and program development, and we're also reaching out to private sector partners, our federal partners. We're looking to work, obviously, in cooperation with the legislature and across state agencies to ensure that we have the necessary programming in place to fix this issue for Pennsylvania. So. Thank you.
Just as a comment, I think you might take the opportunity today to talk to a couple of the people. I don't know whether you were here earlier, what time you got here today, but a couple of the first panels talked about some problems they've had in dealing with some of the state agencies. And in your position, you might be able to coordinate some of those things. So I know Mr. Freeman from Blue Ridge Communications back there, or
yep.
I don't know whether Craig Ecker is still here, but I see him back there. So just something like that in your position, I think that you could do a lot to take down the silos that the governor always talks about and get people to be able to talk to one another. And I know that personally, we've dealt with some issues involving DCNR and some of their towers and using those towers out there and making them more available. So I think that we have a lot of assets that the state has that we could use in a more efficient way and share them.
Yes.
So that's just a general comment.
I think we're in alignment on that, and we are working on that process. There are there's 2,980 state assets, and we have calculated about 750 may be usable. So we do have a significant infrastructure play that could be useful in expanding this access and deployment of broadband. So that's certainly at the top of the list of things we need to accomplish.
Good. Representative Kubulik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Piggybacking on what Senator mentioned about the silos, I believe Lackawanna County has been able to do that and saving money while serving the community. But even with the Kimber network, maybe trying to get the colleges and universities to buy into that and serve as almost connection points for this network, as you heard earlier from doctors. So, I mean, there's a couple of things, and again, the governor's Office of Broadband Initiatives is fairly new, but hopefully these are things that you could look into and the office could look into as we go down the line.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
We have talked to Kimber already. We're working through possible ways we can work together. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question about the concept of laying fiber optics along PennDOT right-of-ways. Has any interstates, any roadways been sort of prioritized for that? Because to me it seemed it would make sense that a Route 6 would get a higher priority than maybe an Interstate 78 or a lower part of 81. Has there been any conversation about sort of ranking priorities 1, 2, 3, and 4?
Yes. That link is actually on the broadband page. It was just posted last week if you want to take a look. There are priority routes that have been listed as part of the incentive program to allow companies to look at what PennDOT's priorities are. Routes aren't actually the only thing that PennDOT is looking for. They have a massive amount of infrastructure and connections that they need to maintain, upgrade. Everything from traffic lights and traffic cameras to driver's license centers to salt sheds. It's a pretty long list of things. We have made that information available to the providers who might be interested in the state's incentive program. I know we had some requests this week for that information, so there are some companies taking a look at that right now. Yep.
Mr. Brame.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark, thanks very much for the testimony. I have more a comment. I was actually going to say the same thing that Senator Yost said about the partnerships idea of working with the Commonwealth and leveraging some of those assets that the Commonwealth has, because we've heard that a couple of times today. But the comment that I would make is really one of appreciation for the fact that this office has been created. And one of the things, and I think one of the frustrations that a lot of people have had that we've heard, I guess in the last 17 years, is that hasn't been a spot in the Commonwealth where people can come and talk to about some of the innovative ideas that they might have on how to get this telecommunications, this broadband out into rural communities or underserved or unserved communities, whether they're rural or not. And at least in my memory, this is the first time we've got an opportunity through your office to sort of have that place to come in and talk about the projects that maybe might go on in Huntington County or a project in Potter and Tioga County, and see how the state can be a part of it. I think before it was, we had to go all over the place to try to identify those areas. So if there's one thing that I'm looking forward to, and I hope that this office really does create, is an opportunity to come and talk about projects, and so you can have the data at your fingertips to say, oh yeah, I think we can help there at various agencies in how to do that. So really appreciate the governor's willingness to do it, and your work and your staff's work on getting that done. Thanks.
Appreciate that. And we are, one of the things that we have been focused on is a lot of outreach, and I've talked to you on many occasions already, is trying to work with the companies and trying to work with the municipalities who have ongoing projects, understanding what is out there, what is being done right now. And we are currently trying to put together a survey of current projects that are being done, how they're funded, where those are, what areas they will serve, and figure out and take a look at how we might build those into the overall solution.
Thank you. Representative Kaiser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mark, thank you for your testimony and all your work. One thing that was in your testimony that I was curious about, it talks about over 800,000 Pennsylvanians that don't have access, and breaks that down to 520,000 that reside in rural areas and 250,000 residing in urban areas. Can you tell me where those numbers come from, and then in addition, why do you think that's occurring in the urban areas?
Sure. The numbers are FCC from the report, and why that is occurring, I think it's the same issue in some of those urban areas where they're low-income areas, and it's not economically feasible for companies to serve some of those areas. So even in the auction that the FCC is holding, there are auctionable territories in urban areas that are there. So it's certainly a problem. It's not just a rural problem, it's really a low-income area problem as well.
Much of our discussion today has been around why we can't get this out into the rural areas, and because of the sparse population and things. And it seems odd that an urban area would have that problem where they do have the population, but I guess, as you're saying, people can't afford the service.
Yeah,
but the service does exist.
Sure, it's a business case, it's take rates, it's their ability to get customers in certain areas. Yep.
It seems like a lot of this comes down to resources and coordination, and that seems like a message that we've heard today over and over, and appreciate all the work that you folks are doing to provide those resources and that coordination. I have some ideas that I spoke with you at the break about, and look forward to getting together with you to talk about some other ideas. So thank you.
Absolutely. This is a learning process, I think, for everybody, and me as well. It's an issue that I'm familiar with as being a former county commissioner just next door in Bradford County. This has come up even back then, and certainly been an issue throughout the administration. And I think when we first met last summer in Potter County, when the governor was coming through, this had come up on every stop that we made. And I probably didn't know it at that point, but the governor talking to me a lot about the broadband issue in the northern tier, and then all of a sudden I'm doing broadband. So
we were actually at
Yes.
Cole Memorial Hospital
Yes.
when he was talking about how he came across Route 6 and didn't have coverage. Interesting. So thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Look forward to working with you.
Thank you for coming under the circumstances, and we wish the best to you and your wife.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Representative Everett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, and just sort of in conclusion, I think that, as I said, that just the turnout today, the presenters and the interest, I think that the center has touched another area of issue that we're going to, I predict this is probably not our last hearing on broadband issues across rural Pennsylvania. And as it was with the opioid issue, once you start peeling, you know, the onion, you learn things, and then you have to follow up on them and learn more and more. So I think that's where we're headed. And again, thank you all the presenters today. A lot of really valuable information and insights, and appreciate you coming out. Thank you.
I'd just like to echo what Representative Everett said, and I mean, it's pretty amazing today. We heard about broadband affecting everything from education, farms, tourism, healthcare, economic development. I mean, that's just to name a few. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank my staff as well as the Center for Rural Pennsylvania staff. We sit here, and these panels are, all of you people that participated are put together because our staffs go together and they ferret out people and they talk people into coming and hunt them down and everything to make it interesting. And I'll tell you, this is one of the more interesting ones that we've had as far as an education of the Center for Rural Pennsylvania Board and probably the legislators here. So it's been very helpful, and there's a tremendous amount. People don't realize how much work goes in background that our staffs put in to set up something like this. And with the communications from our caucus and everything, it's quite an undertaking to do something like this. It's been very pleasant to come here to Wellsboro and you know, bring this to everybody's attention in this area.
Even in the driving snow and wind.
Yeah, I mean, for April weather, I'm not sure I'd recommend it, but in any event. And the one other person that I have not recognized throughout this thing is Barry Dank, who's the director of the Center for Rural Pennsylvania. He's one of the most knowledgeable people that I've ever run into about issues involving rural Pennsylvania and rural issues in general. And he is a recognized expert, not only in this state, but he gets speaking engagements throughout the country. So, Barry, I want to thank you also. So with that, we'll close these hearing, and once again, thanks to everybody who participated.